Good evening, everybody. I'm Mark Houston. I'm an alcoholic and a cocaine addict. And power of God separated me from alcohol the morning of October 19th of 1982. And it is because of that power, which I've come to know as love, that I'm sitting up here in my 21st year of sobriety. It's good to be back in Prescott. Joe and I were here, felt like 50 years ago. It wasn't, I think, in the mid-90s, somewhere in there, up at a camp. I think a couple hundred people showed up, and we had a wonderful weekend up there, established some relationships with people, and back, and here we are again. It's a pleasure and an honor. I want to read something to you out of a book written by a man named Anthony DeMello called The Way to Love. It's called Discipleship. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Luke 14:26. Take a look at the world and see the unhappiness around you and in you. Do you know what causes this unhappiness? You'll probably say loneliness or oppression or war or hatred or atheism, and you'll be wrong. There's only one cause of unhappiness: the false beliefs you have in your head. Beliefs so widespread, so commonly held, it never occurs to you to question them. Because of these false beliefs, you will see the world and yourself in a distorted way. Your programming is so strong and the pressure of society so intense that you're literally trapped into perceiving the world in this distorted kind of way. There is no way out because you do not even have suspicion that your perception is distorted, your thinking is wrong, and your beliefs are false. Look around and see if you can find a single genuinely happy person. Fearless, free from insecurities, anxieties, tensions, and worries. You would be lucky if you found one in 100,000. This should lead you to be suspicious of the programming and the beliefs that you and they hold in common. But you've also been programmed not to suspect, not to doubt, just to trust the assumptions that have been put into you by your tradition, your culture, your society, your religion. And if you're not happy, you've been trained to blame yourself and not your programming, not your cultural and inherited ideas and beliefs. What makes it even worse is the fact that most people are so brainwashed they do not even realize how unhappy they are, like the man in the dream who has no idea he's dreaming. What are these false beliefs that block you from happiness? Well, here are some examples. First, you cannot be happy without the things you're attached to and that you consider so precious. False. There's not a single moment in your life when you do not have everything you need to be happy. Think of that for a minute. The reason why you're unhappy is because you're focusing on what you do not have rather than on what you have right now. Another belief: happiness is in the future. Not true. Right here and now you're happy and you don't even know it, because your false beliefs and your distorted perceptions have got you caught up in fears, anxieties, attachments, conflicts, guilt, and a host of games that you are programmed to play. If you would see through this, you would realize you're happy and don't even know it. Yet another belief: happiness will come if you manage to change the situation you're in and the people around you. We'll look at this one in the fourth step. Not true. You stupidly squander so much energy trying to rearrange the world. If changing the world is your vocation in life, go right ahead and change it. But don't harbor the illusion this is going to make you happy. What makes you happy or unhappy is not the world and the people around you, but the thinking in your head. You may as well search for an eagle's nest in the bed of an ocean as search for happiness in the world outside of you. So if it's happiness you seek, you can stop wasting your energy trying to cure your baldness, or build up an attractive body, or change your residence or job or community or lifestyle, or even your personality. Do you realize you can change every one of these things? You could have the finest looks and the most charming personality and the most pleasant of surroundings and still be unhappy. And another false belief: if all your dreams are fulfilled, you will be happy. And this is also not true. This weekend, I hope that we get you to perhaps question some of your beliefs regarding the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, as outlined in the big book. Joe and I Our intent this weekend is to share with you our experience with those steps, as well as discuss what I like to call the mechanics of the steps. It is our intent to get through all 12 steps in the sessions that that we're going to do with you. I do have one question. Just give me a show of hands. How many of you have like a year or less of sobriety? Raise your hands. Fabulous. How many of you have like between 2 and 5 years? Okay, 5 and 10, 10 and 15, 15 and 20. 20 and 25, 25 and 30, okay, 30 to 40. Fabulous. Good. Well, I got a challenge for all of you, regardless of how long you're sober. That challenge will be to ask the God of your understanding to open up your heart and open up your mind to a new experience with some things. I currently am taking 7 people back through the big book. And I will talk with you more about how I do that. 4 of these people have gone through the book several times. So if you have that experience, one of the things you know about that is you're now up against what is called the memory of your past experience and all this wonderful knowledge that you now have. Or I think as their big book says, resting on your laurels. So what they ask me is, we work with a prayer asking God to set aside what we think we know. And with almost all of them, we're up through the doctor's opinion. And in particular, about 4 of them are expecting some lightning bolt to come bursting through so they're asking me why they're not having some kind of profound experience, right? And I said, well, first of all, you were so asleep that the very first time you even woke up to what was wrong with you, the essence of your first step, that was a major epiphany in and of itself. And then the idea that there could be a God of your understanding, you could have a personal relationship with the second step, and you make that third step decision and do the work, and you come to know God. So I said, that's going to be profound, and you will never work the steps and have the experience you did the first time through. So I said to them, but I tell you what you've never experienced. And they said, what's that? And I said, you've never experienced what we're doing right now out of the big book with God, with each other in this moment. And you don't have to worry about what the experience looks like, and you don't have to name it. So, hopefully that awareness can happen, with all of you here, this weekend. I want to talk a little bit about, where I am currently at. I live in Dallas, Texas. My home group's the Clean Air Group. I am currently going back through the steps, and I want to talk about that in a minute. I rework the first 9 steps every year. And I'll tell you why I do that. I do that because I like the effect that it produces. I do as much with the disciplines of 10, 11 as anyone I know, and sometimes I fall asleep, and I get resentful. And my fears begin to build up, and those kinds of things. And the other thing that I have found over the years, the willingness that I demonstrate in my life on a daily basis is fueled always by my first step experience and my connection to that first step. In my 21st year, I am very current with my first step, which is to drink is to die. If my experience over the years is if you lose your first step connection, it will show up in a course of action that you will very subtly and slowly begin to take. And I can tell you what it looks like. We've heard it before. People that have relapsed. How many people in here have relapse history? Raise your hands. Okay. See if this fits. You first of all begin to decrease the number of meetings that you go to. You do not call your sponsor, if you even had one, with the frequency that you used to, and you begin to hedge on the truth. You begin to lose a sense of conscious contact. You know that sense of peace that comes when you've known God. Your life situation, which is where you work and your relationships, the money in your pocket and your physical body, begins to take on more meaning to you. And you begin to react to life. You're probably not working with the disciplines of 10 and 11, probably cutting back on meditation or not doing meditation at all, doing some prayers, and you begin to cut back on those. And normally there's a process you go through, and then something in the life situation happens, and your mind says, I know something that'll take the pain away, and it's called a drink, and you pick up a drink. My experience with all of that is this. The course of action I have taken today is predicated on my connection with my first step, and that's not an old memory of what it used to be like when I was drinking 21 years ago. That's a very current experience with what it possibly could be like if I picked up a drink again. So that's the other reason I love to rework the first 9 steps is A, I miss some stuff. B, I reconnect with that first step. I get opened up to the second step that maybe there's much more about God that I know nothing about and have no experience with. My third step is a decision to go for that experience. I write inventory and I begin to see that there are some resentments. Those of you that have some time sober, you have experience with this. They call it spiritual pride, in which you get so spiritually fit nothing bothers you anymore, you know. One time I was going back to the steps, this is probably 4 or 5 years ago, and I was so spiritually fit that when I got to inventory, I couldn't find any resentment. So this lady had been sober a long time, said, well, why don't you make a list of people who annoy you? And somewhere between 30 and 40 names rolled off my pen. So, you know, the same challenge applies to some of you who've been sober a long time. I've never met an enlightened drunk. I just don't think it's going to happen. So we still got to deal with our mind and those kinds of things. You know, and then the incredible 5th step promises I get to experience. Who wouldn't want to experience 5th step promises a minimum of once a year? And I like to do multiple 5th steps. I'm going to talk to you about that and why I like to do that. 6th step, identifying the defects of character that are active in my life now. That are active in my life now. The things that create misery and unhappiness in me and others, because I imagine you're like me, you're not going to suffer alone. See, I don't suffer alone. I never have. I don't know as if I ever will. I really like to make sure that people around me get to participate in that. 7th step is, again, regardless of how long I'm sober, coming to God and I see these defects. Regardless of my intent, my great love of God, my great love of you, wanting to do the right thing, and I'm seeing these defects, right? Making a list. The harm's different. You know, you're not sticking guns in people's faces, and the harm is different, but harm is harm, and I don't know as if it has degrees, right? I discovered as I got into a little bit of time, my dishonesty. I used to just lie directly, and then my ego got trickier, and then I just began to lie by omission, right? Ego still operates in the same fashion. It just has a different look to it. It's craftier. And there's always amends. I always find amends that I have to make. And then what that does is that catapults me back into the 10th and 11th step, but now it's whole new ground. Amazing stuff in the 10th step. Amazing stuff in the 11th step. They're like an abyss. And every time back through the work, belief systems like I was just reading about on discipleship, belief systems I've been living my life on once again get shattered. And I'm freer. And my consciousness, the way I experience myself and you and my world, has broadened and widened and deepened. And there's more power in my life. And there's more peace in my life. That's why I rework the first 9 steps once a year. I was talking to a gentleman today, and I know some people that have time will do this. They'll just go back and write inventory. But I didn't start with the 4th step. I started with the first step. So whether you're here with very little time sober or long time sober, I am very glad that you're here. Ask God to help you stay here all weekend. to give you the power to stay here, to go through this experience. Over the years, I've gone to a lot of different things, monasteries and weekends like this. I'm no different than any of you. There's a part of me that really thinks it really knows a lot, and it becomes difficult to sit. Most of the things that have been in my highest good, it's been very difficult for me to experience because another part of me just doesn't want anything to do with that. So that's all I got for now.
Good evening. My name is Joe Hawk, and I'm an alcoholic. I have a prayer, too, I'd like to read. God, we invite you into this room to guide and direct each of us as we seek your truth. Father, please set aside within each of us that which would block us off from the truth. Lay aside our prejudices about what we think we know about this process, this weekend, and our own spiritual condition. Remove our fears, Lord, that we may hear your truth through the members of this group. Give us the strength and courage to share your truth with each other in the spirit of love and compassion for our fellow man. Amen. It's good to be here. We've done 3 of these in the last 5 years, and that was after I spent 5 years in India. And the last 2, one was in California, one was in New York. I had a hard time opening this book. Of course, Mark covers it really well, and I would share my experience. And there's a part of me that wants to challenge myself to try and do that again, because the last 2 times it felt like if I opened to the title page, it would be trying to return to something that was old. And I don't want to be old. I know it's inevitable, and I can't defeat my own ego, and I can't make what I would like happen here. But there comes a time when you're taken past the Word, but when you're taken past the Word and you begin to experience the Spirit of the Word, you have to remember where you were, and that there are people that through the Word in this book will find that same kind of spirit. So what I did was I visited my sponsor in Denver in August, and he had a book that I gave him 6 years ago, and he gave it back to me and said that I could use this book again. And this is the book that I carried the first 10 years of my sobriety, and I'm going to use that book this weekend. Probably doesn't mean much to anybody here, but it's quite special for me to even have this book again. I got sober in Denver, August 1982, way before Mark did. Same treatment center. He came along when I was a graduate, and I was taking patients to meetings. And my sponsor later told me that was carrying people to the message, not carrying the message to anyone. I didn't have a message. I had a car. There's a big difference between having a message and having a car, or taking people to the message or carrying the message yourself. I had no experience. Took me 6 months in this program to hit bottom with the second half of step 1. And I've been doing the work ever since. I've had a year in between finishing amends. I've had a year and a half. This last time was 2 years. So I was 5 years in Denver. I was 10 years in Santa Monica. I was 5 years in northern India, and I didn't plan that. I went for a 2-month visit, and I'm alcoholic. I always stay longer than I should, and I arrive early. I left Los Angeles to get here Wednesday. And I stayed in India for 5 years, and I got to be a part of starting a drug and alcohol treatment program for the Tibetan government for the first time in their history. And I don't know how that happens for a guy like me. And now I've been back for just over a year. And I got back, and I didn't transcend alcoholism, no matter who my teacher might have been. I've had some great spiritual teachers. And I just can't seem to transcend alcoholism. And I guess for a guy like me, that's a blessing, because if I had, you'd probably be coming to India to my ashram rather than me coming to your ashram. You know, God has always known better what I need than I do. So I got back last January 2002 and started to pray about where was I supposed to be. Lots of places to go, but I prayed about who might be doing something that I would feel passionate about. And some names came, and two were not evident, and one was Mark. And when I knew I was going to Texas for a period of time, I asked him if he would take me through the work. That experience I'd like to talk about later in the weekend. So we're both in our 21st year, and we're glad to be here. And I always need to keep in mind, because I think my sponsor, was 21 years ago, had that in mind when he came to the basement of a treatment center and carried the message to me. I heard my sponsor in my first meeting, but it took me 6 months to ask him. It scared me for many reasons, which I'll share later. I think if we're going to give each other spiritual consent, which I don't do freely in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's usually a dangerous thing to ask a question in AA. I remember asking once when I was new how to write inventory, and this was in Denver where they do the work. And I came out of that meeting more confused than when I went in. And one guy told me I didn't need to write inventory. He never had. But he seemed a little edgy. Another guy told me to write my life story. And unfortunately, I had tried that and I hadn't gotten any results. Another guy gave me a 140 question inventory, and I was just confused. But what an amazing thing for a new person, if you're an alcoholic or an addict or both. What an amazing thing for somebody like us to be confused. And then to admit it, because I think the three hardest words for an alcoholic to say are, I don't know. Some alcoholics say the three hardest words are, I love you. And I kind of wonder how they drank. Give me a couple drinks, I'll tell anybody I love them, right? But to say I don't know, and I've gone back and forth over the years with what they really meant. And I think they meant different things for different people. What they really meant when they said, are you willing to go to any length? Because that can either grab your ego, and you're going to say to yourself, wow, let me tell you what lengths I'm willing to go to. And then you start doing those things, and the ego loves it, and it increases your ego. It builds the ego. But I don't think that was the purpose. I think our original 6 steps, which are in our book on page 292, I believe, the first step was complete deflation. And I don't think they meant complete deflation of the tires on my car. I think they meant complete deflation of the ego. But the funny thing is, I can't do that. But a lot of people in the program will even take credit for that. I'm sure you've all heard it. I'm going to go home, smash my ego, surrender, work on my defects. I'll get back to you next week, right? I can't smash my ego. I can't bring about surrender. That's what the great persuader did for me. I believe behind the great persuader is God. I can't work on my defects. I can't, and so I was surrendered, but still, sometimes whatever there's left that hasn't been smashed, it'll hook into some of the stuff in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it took me years to realize that for a guy like me to admit that I'm powerless over alcohol and my life is unmanageable and there's nothing I can do to keep myself sober or manage my life is any length. I had to go to any length before I could admit that. And I believe if the recovery, the importance of our foundation, I believe if the recovery process for each of us does not begin with some sort of surrender to that there's nothing you can do to keep yourself sober, a lot of the things we do in AA will just increase your ego. Get up to take a chip, 30 days, tell them about the great conscious contact you have after 30 days and you've done nothing but go to meetings and somehow not drink. 90 days you might be a little more humble, but you're ready to go home and smash your ego and surrender finally. And on, and they do things. And I think they do things because old-timers are very wise and our founders were very wise. And for those that get hooked into their ego, they're going to hopefully just blow right out the top and it's just going to blow up. Or if you don't have much ego left, it's going to bring you to where you really are. I knew after 30 days something miraculous was happening because I had never had 30 days in my 18 years of drinking. I'm currently in the 9th step. I should probably say that I'm in 8 because my list is in the hotel and I'd probably have to look around the room, but I don't think I owe any amends in this room yet. It's been an amazing time through the work. So I think if we're going to give each other spiritual license where you can ask Mark and I anything that you would like, that we also may get that permission from some of you that agree to that. So I have a few questions. These are great questions, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are great questions to ask yourself when you start the work, and then ask yourself again when you've taken the 3rd step and see how the change in thinking has come about. So one of the questions I would like to ask, which is these are myths. There's a lot of myths in Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the ones that I think destroys more alcoholics than a lot of the myths, which one of our founders fell victim to and one of our founders didn't. How many in this room believe that the first 9 steps were meant to be done once and just live the rest of your life in 10, 11, and 12? Great. Our founder, Bill Wilson, fell victim to that belief and wasn't exposed to Dr. Harry Tiebout for a while. Our other founder was very close to Dr. Harry Tiebout and continued doing 1 through 9 on a regular basis because of a phenomena that Dr. Harry Tiebout laid out for us, and that's the reconstruction of the ego after having a spiritual awakening. 1 through 9 once did not work for me. The first time I started 1 through 9, I didn't finish amends. I left about 30 or 40 that I was aware of and soon hit the wall. I would be willing to bet that there's a common denominator among those people that raised their hands when Mark asked for those that have had relapse experience. I would bet that there's a common denominator among 99% of those that raised their hand, and that is that you went back out with unfinished amends. And I think that has a lot more to do with than you quit going to meetings. There's people all over the world that don't have meetings. They're called loners, internationalists, members of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've seen them at every international I've been to. You know, I've met very few people that finished every amends that they were consciously aware of have that kind of experience with relapse. Another question. How many in this room believe drug addiction and alcoholism are the same? Great, we're going to have some fun with that. Let me throw one question out before we get to that. And I'll do it by using the crowd. How many alcoholics in this room could take or leave drugs? How many drug addicts in this room could take or leave alcohol? Do not get the physical craving for more alcohol. Great. I'm not a drug addict. I did drugs. That'd be like saying everybody that drinks alcohol is alcoholic. We all know better than that. There's hard drinkers that can die from alcohol. Have a habit badly enough to be physically and mentally impaired. It's described in our book, A Hard Drinker. I'm a hard drug user who had a habit several times. Made up my mind, walked away. Couldn't quit drinking. So we're going to look at differences between drug addiction and alcoholism because it's a myth in Alcoholics Anonymous. If it was true, every alcoholic in this room would not be able to take or leave drugs. Now, do I mean you can use drugs and stay sober? No. Somebody always hears that there's a difference, and they automatically think, Joe Hawk told me I could use drugs, right? I'll say it on the record, right? That doesn't mean you can use drugs because you would be powerless over where they would take you, but not powerless over them the way I am. There's a difference. And if it was true, then every addict in this room would be an alcoholic. I know lots of addicts. One in this room in particular. He almost died in this program, suffering from the delusion that alcoholism and drug addiction were the same. Killed him. Damn near killed him. And he got really clear about his first step. Does he think he can drink alcohol? No. He would drink alcohol and go back to what he really likes. But please don't tell me that what you really like is your drug of choice. I love that one. You meet an alcoholic, he says, my drug of choice was alcohol. Isn't it funny? The drug that we usually say is our drug of choice was the drug you had no choice in the world over. So we've been sold a lot of myths. We've paid a lot of money for these myths. And it's time to get free. If you're willing to pray in your own way to whatever you believe in for an open mind and a new experience this weekend. Some of you might be here for information. Go back to your home group and sound a little better. Be a little more clear on the big book, but you're not here for experience. Or maybe you are. Maybe you'll have one in spite of yourself. Some of you might be here because you were required to be here. Your sponsor. Halfway house. You too can have an experience. Every time I've used that prayer, my mind will tell me this prayer will not work. There won't be much in 1, 2, and 3. And inventory you probably pretty well know now. And every single time I've been surprised. So if you would like to possibly have more than just some more information or knowledge, you're willing to say a prayer to whatever you believe in for an open mind and a new experience, we might all get past some stuff that's holding us back from an experience with God. You know, sometimes, and I'm not down on religion, but sometimes religion is a block to religious experience. Because why? Rusty and I were talking about it the other night. Some people get stuck in the Word. They miss the Spirit. Same here. I've done it. I've worshipped all the fingers that point to God and forgot that they were just fingers. Go to meetings, read the book, work the steps, get a sponsor. My first 6 months, I saw people that did all those things drink again, and I finally went to my sponsor at 6 months when I met him, when I went to him. And I said, I thought you told me those were the things that would keep me sober. He said, no, we just hoped all of those things together would get you in touch with something that's already keeping you sober. You know, we make such a big deal about turning to the closest thing to us. I'm searching for God. I'm going to look for God out there. You're not going to find Him. You might start to see Him in other people who will get you excited about searching deep down within to find the great reality. Let's try another question. How many in this room that are alcoholic or addict believe they have a choice today whether they drink or use? God bless you. You might find that every description of alcoholic or drug-addicted insanity in our big book is because somebody thought they had a choice today. The idea that I have a choice over alcohol today is the insanity of alcoholism that will take me to the first drink. I have no more choice today in a fit spiritual condition to drink than I had to not drink when I got here. Where alcohol is concerned, this book says maybe it's not true. Maybe we're going to find that this book is not true for some alcoholics. Maybe we're going to find that this book describes 4 different types of alcoholics. And maybe type 2 alcoholics can get by with just choosing not to drink on a daily basis. But I can tell by looking at you, there's people in this room that after all these years, if you chose not to drink every day, wouldn't you have made the wrong choice at least once in all these years with your track record? And if choice has anything to do with will, and you've done what's necessary to give your will and your life to God, where's the choice? How about another one? Anybody in this room believe that not drinking and going to meetings treats alcoholism? You hear all the time there's no requirements or musts in our program. How many people believe that in the recovery program in Alcoholics Anonymous there's no musts or requirements? Good. So we're going to explore some of those requirements, some of those things we were asked to do, some of the delusions that we've suffered from. Drug addiction and alcoholism are the same until I looked at my experience. Until I met a man that knew the difference, and he wasn't selling me anything. He was laying out his experience for me to look at. One more thing I wanted to read. Do not believe in anything simply because you heard it, especially from us. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. Do not believe in anything because it is spoken and rumored by many. Do not believe in anything simply because it is found and written in your book. Do not believe in anything merely on the authority of your teacher or your sponsor. But after observation, analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit for you and all, and you've had an experience with it, accept it and live up to it. One other thing I wanted to mention, Mark and I no longer operate with the kind of morality that most of the world operates on. And sometimes that makes it a little difficult to operate in the world with people who believe in good and bad and right and wrong, especially in this program. There's a morality in Alcoholics Anonymous that I believe is much more powerful than good, bad, right, and wrong. And that is, does it work? Is it working for you? I don't know if any of you saw the movie Fight Club, but there's a scene in there where they're on the airplane and one of the characters, they're both the same character, but one of the characters is saying to the other character, which is really himself, he's bragging about his wit, his sense of humor. The other character says to him, how's that working for you? That's the morality that we try to use in our lives.
Mark, alcoholic. This weekend, let the big book be the source as you relay your own experience alongside some of the things we're going to look at. I've worked in the field of chemical dependency now about 12, 13 years, and unlike a lot of people, there's a screen of hospitals and treatment centers between the alcoholic addict and 12-step. So instead of dying in the rooms, they go to these places, show up at a few meetings, you don't really get to know them, they leave, things happen. If you're a victim of the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction and do not have a revolutionary spiritual experience, you're probably going to die. That is why it is so critical that you find out your truth in the first step. Am I a real alcoholic? Am I a real addict? What does that mean? Is this me? Do I need power? Do I need a revolutionary spiritual experience in my life? This is a deadly, deadly disease. This program's been around. This book was published in 1939. It's 2003. The latest grapevine said that the fellowship of AA worldwide, I believe, was about 2.3 million. In the United States, about 1.8 million. And I believe the average length of sobriety was 72 months. Why? Because this is a deadly, deadly disease. And if you lose your experience with that first step connection, all those things we've talked about earlier will slowly and gradually filter into your life. We have a suicide rate 75 times the national average. Sober. First step. That's what we're going to look at. We're going to talk to you about the title page, the table of contents, the forwards, the general areas of general information. You're going to start looking at step 1 in the doctor's opinion up through page 23. 33 pages of information to look at one thing. When you take a drink, do you lose control? Yes or no, based on your experience. For those of you who do drugs, when you do drugs, do you lose control? Pages 23 to 43, we're going to look at what the big book calls insanity. Joe has alluded to this. Pages 23 to 43 of the big book talk to you about the fact that you're sober, and does your mind take you back to a drink? Will you commit the most insane act of your life from a state of consciousness called sobriety? Do you have experience with that? Did sufficient reason ever keep you away from a drink? Those of you that live in Phoenix, you saw in the last day or two that a very young man was very tragically killed. 17-year-old in a crosswalk by an attorney. It was in the front page and all over the news. Anyone else see that? Read that article. You're talking about a real alcoholic who thought he had choice. Who thought he had choice. Pages 23 to 43, based on my experience, are about the most misunderstood pages of the entire book, And yet it was in those pages that I died the alcoholic death. And I saw that I needed God. And so we're going to talk about what's in those pages. The idea that the most insane thing at certain times, you're going to commit the most insane act and you have no say in it. I work with chronic relapsers. I have to assume if there is such a thing as reincarnation, and I don't know if there is, but I have to assume if there is, I was not a good person in my last lifetime. And that's why I'm working with chronic relapsers. Their 4 favorite words are I know and yes, but. We just experienced one last night. Less than 30 days at one time. I can't remember. He had 4, 5, 6 years and talked longer than anybody in the meeting. That sums him up, right? And I love to ask him a question. And the question is, and it comes out of the big book, it says when somebody relapses, and then this is around the story of Jim, is they really ask you to look at what led up to the relapse. But I like to ask them the question about this issue of choice. And without exception, every single one of these chronic relapsers has said to me on the day they relapsed, they chose to do that. And I said, I am sorry that you believe that and that you think that. Because somebody has never gone through pages 23 to 43 with you. And what I hope you come to find out this weekend, that if you're a real alcoholic or a real drug addict, that you and I stay clean and sober one day at a time by one thing and one thing only, and choice has nothing to do with it, fit spiritual condition. And in fit spiritual condition, it is impossible for my mind to take me back to alcohol. Because there's a power between me and that thought taking place. So that's one of the reasons we're here, and we want to go back through this book with you all. We want to share with you what I like to call the mechanics and how we look at these steps. And you know, if you've been around for a while, you watch so many people die from this thing. And my experience shows me, I don't know how many people I've worked with. I'll just tell you a lot. I read something recently about statistics. I think it was a fairly reliable source, but it said that 47% of all statistics are made up in the spot. I thought, sounds like an AA meeting, right? You know. But so I want to talk a little bit about the title page. If you have your big book, if you'll open it up, I have a 4th edition. It says this is a story of many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. That's the first promise of hope that we get, and it's on the title page. If you're new, do not think that you have to wait till you get to amends before you get a lot of promises.
There's a question in that statement he just read. The question is, how many of you believe you'll always be recovering?
You remember we told you we're going to challenge some belief systems, correct?
You'll always be recovering.
How many of you believe that you'll always be recovering? Always be recovering. ING.
Well, you got to ask that when you read that page that he's on right now. Nobody that wrote this book had more than 5 years when it was published, and it hasn't been changed except for some of the forewords. And it'll say in several places that we have recovered.
This one is a beautiful one. Those of you who have a belief system that you're always going to be recovering, what I want to ask you in the course of this weekend is ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, where did you get that idea? And 2, is it consistent with the big book? And come to your own truth about that. I have had to get rid of as many belief systems in the fellowship of AA that would have killed me as I did the insane ones I brought to AA. And that was one of them. I would always be recovering.
A lot of people think when they hear that, I'm a recovered alcoholic, I'm not suffering from alcoholism, that you mean cured. At the same time, they say we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve, but that doesn't mean you can't live in a recovered state. If we were in a smaller group for the weekend, 20 or 30 of us in a circle, I would ask those that raised their hand who said, course, you're always going to be. Recovery is a horrible place to be. It's wonderful the first time. If you're doing it for the first time, enjoy it, because hopefully you'll never do it for the first time again. But I don't want to live as a recovering alcoholic, always being sick, always suffering, because the founders promised us from the forward to the first edition, the first page of the first book ever printed, that you can recover from alcoholism. I do not think that I'm cured, but I can live in a recovered state.
I think over the years, the reason people don't want to, all of you know what a Concordia is? If you had a Concordia and looked up the word recovered, I believe it's used 14 times. The word recovering is used twice, and it's only in the last 4 chapters, which are about how to practice these principles in all your affairs. I have a sense that people who get hung up on the word recovering have this idea that if they tell themselves they're recovered, they'll walk away from AA. It has a whole different meaning. But let the book speak to you about that. This says that this is a story of how many thousands of men. See, I've recovered from alcohol. I'm not drinking. I haven't drank. I'm in my 21st year. Now, does that mean I'm still not doing life stuff? Of course I'm still doing life stuff. But if I lie to you today, it's not because I'm drinking. It's because I'm a liar. If I steal from you, it's not because I'm drinking. It's because I'm a thief. You follow? See, I have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. But anyhow, we'll let the book answer that question for you as you go through this. Now, there used to be a circle and a triangle. And I just want to talk briefly about that circle and triangle because it's always been very important to me in what I call locating myself. And I always just draw one back in my book. But that circle always represented wholeness. And inside that circle there was a triangle, and they were called the 3 legacies of AA. They were given to us in 1955. The first one given to us was recovery, and that's at the bottom of that circle. In recovery is when I take my mind, because the main problem of the alcoholic centers in the mind, I take my mind to the recovery process. You know that mind that takes me back to a drink when I'm sober? That mind? I take my mind to the recovery process, which is found in the title page to page 164. I have a psychic change. So underneath the circle and triangle and the word recovery, I always write the word title page to page 164. And the second legacy given to us was unity. That's the fellowship. I take in my mind that went through a psychic change, I take that into the fellowship. There were reasons in the early days of AA that they made you do step work before they took you into meetings. They wanted your mind to have gone through some kind of a change so that you wouldn't be bringing all your problems into the meetings, which were much more solution-based. So I take my mind, that psychic change, into the unity, the fellowship. The third part is service. You get to the 10th step. The 10th step says you have entered the world of the Spirit. I have an awakened spirit. The work in 4 through 9, face and be rid of that which has me blocked from God, from my spirit. I now have an awakened spirit. I take that out to be a service to God and my fellow human beings in every area of my life. Not just AA. In my career, every single area of my life. So I have a threefold illness. I have 3 things to treat this illness. And when I'm involved in all 3, I experience wholeness, at one-ment. You see, at one-ment, peace, power. One of the things I do with people that I work with and sponsor is a minimum once a month I sit down and I locate them on the circle and the triangle. Where are you at specifically in the steps? What are you doing with the disciplines of 10, 11? How many meetings a week are you going to? Do you have a home group? Are you involved with the home group? Are you going to group conscience? Where are you at with service? Not just in AA, not just sponsorship. Other kinds of service. Strangely enough, I find that when people are equally balanced in all 3, they are much more at peace with themselves. So that part of it has always been important to me, that circle and that triangle.
It brings us to a question. How many have believed or now believe that it's a twofold disease, body and mind? Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that we're not only bodily and mentally ill, we're spiritually sick, and when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. My life is not unmanageable because of the mental obsession. I'm powerless over alcohol because of a physical craving and a mental obsession. My life is unmanageable because of a spiritual malady. I have a threefold disease. We have a 3-part program. We also have 3 sets of 12 spiritual principles. 12 steps for recovery. 12 traditions for the fellowship, for unity. 12 concepts of service. 36 spiritual principles. I found that I needed to get some power by doing the base, 12 steps, and that with that power I could begin to practice the 12 traditions in my life and learn about the 12 concepts of service when being of service. Here's how I see it now. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps, recovery, I carry this message to alcoholics in the fellowship, unity, and practice these principles in all my affairs, service, unity, recovery, and service, contained in the 12th step. I'm going to throw out another challenge. Many people in this room, myself included, my first time through the steps, with unfinished amends, I would have told you, I've had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. All I had had was a major awakening as the result of 1 through 9.5. If you're still stuck on your first set of amends, don't tell people you've had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. Tell them you've had a major life change and a major awakening as the result of 1 through 9.5. There's a big difference.
If you want to turn to the table of contents, I don't know, some of you who are newer, if this thought has occurred to you, but the first time the Big Book tells you that you're at a step is you're at step 3, so a logical question is, well, where's 1 or 2? And the preface and all the forwards is general information about the fellowship and AA, etc. And where you're going to find step 1 is the doctor's opinion up through Bill's story. And then pages 17 to 23 is where the book is going to look at, are you physically powerless once you take a drink? And then pages 23 to 43 is where we're going to look at the obsession of the mind. So everything really from the doctor's opinion up through more about alcoholism is looking at 2 things, the illness of the body and the mind. We use page 44, 45 and a paragraph on page 52 to talk about the spiritual malady. See, Joe talked about something. I'll use some words to describe the spiritual malady. 3 of these words come from the doctor's opinion. See if any of you can relate. Restless, irritable, discontent. Having trouble in personal relationships. Prey to misery and depression. Full of fear, feel useless, unhappy, not satisfied with my life. Cannot control my emotional nature. That is what our Big Book calls a spiritual malady. And that's why the Big Book, it's in the 60s, says, when the spiritual malady is overcoming you, you will straighten out mentally, meaning the obsession, and physically. There's a warning in there. What's the opposite side of that coin? If the spiritual malady in me is not treated, I will not straighten out mentally. Because I drink to treat all those symptoms that I just described to you. And I suspect you do the same thing.
I've had people tell me that I'm powerless over alcohol because of the physical craving, and my life is unmanageable because of the mental obsession, and that's step 1. Boy, my life must be just really manageable. The obsession has been removed for many years. I have a part of my disease that was in full bloom before I ever took a drink. Why was I pouring alcohol on it with such a vengeance? Every description of untreated alcoholism in this book fits me before I ever took a drink.
See, and later on the book does what I perceived at the time was a very cruel thing. You make a 3rd step decision and you start to write inventory, so you're in the work a little bit, right? Then the book makes a statement, oh, by the way, alcohol and or drugs is not your problem, it's a symptom. It's like, excuse me? Fellowship is named Alcoholics Anonymous. I came here because I got a problem with alcohol. No, you don't. And we needed to get you here long enough, dried out, to explain to you what is really your problem. Now, alcohol will be a problem if this problem's not treated, but your problem's not alcohol.
That's when you get clear on the difference between drunkenness and alcoholism. Alcoholism is that stuff that you wake up to in the morning when you haven't had a drink. Alcoholism is that stuff after 4.5 years in this program is right in your face. Alcoholism is the terror, the frustration, and the bewilderment between drinks, coupled with the physical craving and the mental obsession. I can't keep myself sober.
We're going to look at step 2 from we agnostics through the ABCs. And then from that point on, of course, the book gets very specific about what step you're on. Tells you you're on step 3, 4, 5, etc., up to the last 4 chapters, which are about practicing these principles in all your affairs.
Could it be this simple? That after the ABCs where it says, now we're at step 3, could it be this simple? That everything from the doctor's opinion to where it says now we're at step 3 could be steps 1 and 2? It could be that simple. And the description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, in relationship to my personal adventures before and after. Before the first drink and after the first drink. And sober, make clear that I'm alcoholic and I can't manage my own life. And that no human power can relieve my alcoholism. And that God can and will if I seek Him. The only 3 things I need to be convinced of to go on to step 3, they just take 63 pages to help me look at it. That's how important it is. Almost 64 pages out of 164 on 2 steps. We'll find to look at steps 1 and 2. I'd like to back up for just a second and mention just a couple things. They made a big mistake in our 4th edition. They made a big mistake. And they got to change it. They just have to change it. Or we're just all going to just keep writing and emailing and sending letters and delegates. All of them. Now, I know a lot of you are more ashamed of being sober than you are being drunk. And when you get your book, you throw the paper cover away and you cover it with something. Look what I did my first year. This could be anything. This could be a novel, right? I put leather around it, right? Somebody gave me this cover. Because there was a period of time where I was more ashamed of being sober. Everyone in town knows you. I mean, if you drank in Prescott, my God, I mean, everybody probably knows everybody, right? Do incredible, tragic things and then get sober and be ashamed of being sober more than you were of being drunk. So you throw the paper cover away and you miss one of the most important statements that I didn't find it for quite a while. And it was in the paper cover in the 3rd edition, the 2nd edition, the 1st edition. And in that paper cover, it used to say this. Not only did half the books that went out produce recovery, 300,000 books, 150,000 people recovered. 1 recovery for every 2 books. Now it says here that before the 4th edition, 22 million books went out. And only 10%. 2 million. Is that 10% of 20 million? 2 million? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Why is that? There's another part in the forewords we're going to find that they used to take you to recovery before they brought you to a meeting, and our success rate was 75%. Our success rate would probably be stretching it to say 15. Be careful you're not doing what the majority do in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm proud for the first time in my life to be a member of a minority, and it's not a popular minority in Alcoholics Anonymous. But you know what? I don't want to do what the majority do in Alcoholics Anonymous because you know what? The majority drink again. 51% are not staying sober. Be proud to be a part of a minority, that the chances are better rolling the dice that God has more power than booze, that you're involved in all 3 parts of the program. But on that paragraph, on that dust cover, there was a statement before our 4th edition that used to say, the basic text, page 1 through 164, remains unchanged. This is the AA message, just as it was introduced in 1939. Let's see what they say now. 1 person, given the authority by the General Service Conference, with no reread. And this is what they're telling us now. The basic text, page 1 through 164, which had been the foundation of recovery for many alcoholics, remains and still remains unchanged. So a page that used to tell you what's the message. You ever been to a service conference and they're all saying service is anything that makes carrying the message possible? And you bring up what's the message that we're here to find out about carrying. You could drop a bomb in the middle of the room. It would be like, what do you mean? There's so many different opinions now about the message. At least they used to tell new people that the first 164 pages is the message. Now it's something that had been. That statement makes our big book a history book. Another guy in New York said to me, why shouldn't they say that? It's true. Once again, the big book is reflecting the fellowship. The first 164 are something you've all been criticized and chastised and called names. Names that you'd have to have an ugly heart to call somebody. Imagine using the word Nazi. If you had any conception of what that word means about somebody that wants to do what's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that the fellowship was named after. Or vice versa. The fellowship was named after the book. Nowadays you would think it's not a popular message doing what's in this book. They also made another mistake in the actual foreword. You know what they tell me here? That a meeting online in front of a computer is the same as my home group around the corner. And I'll tell you what, I've met very few people in this room, and looking in your eyes is not the same as sitting in front of a computer. They're going to change that too. They could have said that meetings online are helpful to get in touch with us, or if you're bedridden, or if you're outside the country. But to say to new people that sitting in front of a computer screen is the same as looking at the eyes of the members of your home group, it's a sad reflection on the changes in our fellowship.
There's something on the forward of the second edition on page XBI that I always spend time with when I go back through, and here they're talking about this time when Bill and Dr. Bob met, and this has to do with this first step and the rest of the steps. Talks about the position. Pay attention to this. He had repeatedly tried spiritual means, so God, right, to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but he had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, step one, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. I said this earlier. Steps 2 through 12 are acts against the will. Unless you have something like your life staring at you, you won't do 2 through 12, and that's why your first step experience is so critical. Find out your truth. Is this me? Is to drink mean to die or to do drugs? Is this me? Because you can see, if you read more about Dr. Bob's history, he'd go to church and not go to church, and he'd get dipped and dunked, and the list was endless. But he would never do it consistently, and the reason was he never had enough willingness because he never understood what was wrong with him. This is why this first step experience is always been for me so critical, why it's so important that I stay connected to it. Because it is my connection to my first step that still has me so much involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, in this book, in sponsorship, in having a sponsor, in all parts of the program. That still has it fresh, new, young, and exciting for me. But it's that first step connection.
And I think the key word in that description of Dr. Bob's experience was not only the understanding of alcoholism, it says, and its hopelessness. You ever seen somebody with a pretty clear first step, but it's not rooted in hopelessness? Like they can explain the craving, the mental obsession, and then they tell you what they do to keep themselves sober. That's the first step filled with hope. I don't know about you, but every time I left treatment, I left with a relapse prevention plan. And I left with hope. But the sad thing about my hope, it's always rooted in something I am going to do to keep myself sober. If you can prevent your next relapse, you don't belong in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll throw that out there. Because the first step is, I can't prevent my next relapse, and I can't manage my life. If you're powerless over alcohol, there's no choice. And there's no doing nothing. You see, I don't do these things anymore to stay sober. I do these things because I am sober. There's a big difference. I have no delusions about me being able to do anything to keep myself sober. But from that hopelessness comes a willingness I never had in my life because I was out of hope. And in hopelessness, there's real hope for an alcoholic. It's one of our first paradoxes.
We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back, and then we're going to do one more session and finish up the first step. I'm an alcoholic. Can you all hear this all right? All right. How about we take I want to read another prayer by a man named Thomas Merton. Can you hear me? Is that better? Okay. It says, my Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me, and I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I'm following your will does not mean that I'm actually doing so, but I believe the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore will I trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you're ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. Thomas Merton. Those of you who have your big books, if you'd turn to the doctor's opinion. And I would like to mention something. I work in the field of chemical dependency. I subscribe to magazines and books that have to do with medical research on the subject of alcoholism and drug addiction. And what I find in the year 2003, everything that medical science and research can find about our illness in terms of the brain, in terms of the body, etc., all of it is in complete agreement from the doctor's opinion, which was written by William D. Silkworth, a man who came up with these conclusions based on observation. I personally find that absolutely incredible, that that's something that he came up with from a standpoint of observing us. From what I've read, this is a man who came face to face with somewhere in the neighborhood of 50,000 alcoholics and drug addicts. So he had some experience. And from those experiences, he came up with some observations about what was wrong with us. And I want to talk a little bit about that. It's Joe and I's intent to get through the portion of the book that will talk about the illness of the body and the illness of the mind, and get into the spirituality. We'll do one more session. We'll be out of here a little before 10 tonight. But in the doctor's opinion on page XXVI, I want to read a couple things. Keep in mind, at this point in time in the book, we don't really know what's wrong with us. They have earlier on said that this book is going to show us precisely how to recover from a hopeless state of mind and body. So a little earlier on, they had introduced us to something that might be wrong with us. And then it says the physician, who at our request gave us this letter, has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. And in this statement, this man confirms what we who suffered alcoholic or drug addict torture must believe. That's a must. That my body is quite as abnormal as my mind. A little further on, they talk about our bodies are sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of an alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. And they introduce us to this idea that you and I have an allergy to alcohol. And further on, they say that as a matter of fact, this allergy is going to explain many things for which you could not otherwise account. When I found out that I suffered from an allergy to alcohol and that allergy manifested in a phenomenon called craving, that was great news to me. And here's why. I had hundreds of experiences of taking a drink, having to be somewhere or do something and not showing up for it. And I did not know why. And sometimes it really made other people angry. I have missed funerals, weddings, fortunately none of my own. One wedding I was to be best man in. Job interviews. Going to pick up money that was due me, and I take a drink and I don't go. I mean, that's insanity, right? I had hundreds and hundreds, in employers saying, we're getting calls from your accounts and they're smelling alcohol in your breath. And if we hear that again, we're going to have to let you go. And I do it again. And I don't know why. And I don't know about you, but you have enough of those experiences, you really start to say to yourself, what is wrong with me? I'm intelligent. What is wrong with me over and over again? And so when I found out that the reason I did all that stuff is explained on the next page, XXVIII, that gave me a tremendous sense of comfort. I finally got an explanation. And they go on, and because they describe what happens to me. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, the action of alcohol on an alcoholic is a manifestation of an allergy. And so they're talking about what happens to me when I take a drink. I take a drink, and then I get this phenomenon of craving. And it said that this craving is limited to this class and never, and highlight that word never, it never occurs in an average temperate drinker. It goes on to say that if this is me, I can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And then there's some great questions I ask myself. Did I form the habit? Yes. Did I find I couldn't break it? Yes. Did I lose my self-confidence? Yes. My reliance upon things human. My problems pile up, become difficult to solve? Yes, yes, yes. And the reason I'm answering yes to all those is because when I take a drink, I break out in a phenomenon called craving because I have an allergy to alcohol. That finally explained what had been going on with me for many, many years. And they go on and they further talk. By the way, if you're in the room and you're alcoholic and or addict or trying to find out your truth, this is a great tool to begin to use to look at that. Look at alcohol and drugs separately. When you take a drink, did you lose control? Did you experience this phenomenon called craving? And by the way, if you know any normal drinkers, and probably most of you do if you've been sober a while, I love to ask them these questions. I used to use my mother. She's passed away, God bless her. My mother drank for 60 years. She wasn't a drunk. So I would ask her like, I'd say, Mom, have you ever lost control? And she would look at me and her eyes would get kind of big and she would say, no, why would I do that? See? And I would say to her, well, have you ever experienced a craving when you take a drink? No. And then I'd say, well, have you ever been drunk? She said, well, of course, when I want to get drunk. And so I would take these things in the book and I'd ask her, she had a whole nother response to them. And the reason is when my mother took a drink, she didn't break out in this phenomenon called craving. Now my father, her husband did. He died of alcoholism in 1986. And I have 3 brothers, and they're just like me, and they take a drink and the drink takes them. Because of this thing, this allergy that the book talks about. And it goes on and further on tells me that if this happened to me, and it did, that frothy emotional people will not work with me. We all know what that is, right? Husbands, wives, parents begging us, please quit drinking, etc., etc. Says the message which can interest and hold me better have depth and weight. And the message of the big book has depth and it has weight to it. In nearly all cases, my ideals must be grounded in a power greater than myself if I'm to recreate my life. Bottom of this page is one of the most important paragraphs in the doc's opinion. And by the way, I'm gonna read this to you in first person because it's how I read the big book. See, I don't know if you can relate to this. I'm so selfish when I read the word we, I think they mean you. So when I read the big book, I use either my name or I. So I'm going to read this. I drink essentially because I like the effect produced by alcohol. I want to talk about that effect for a minute. I found it extremely important when I go back through the steps to take a look at the effect produced by alcohol. What happened to me when I took a drink? Now, the book gives me some words to describe it: ease, comfort. And I'll tell you why it's important for me to look at the effect produced by alcohol. I also like to look at how was I experiencing myself prior to a drink. Why? Because later on, the big book's going to talk to me about a thing called the spirituality. And I have discovered when I've looked at my own experience that if the spirituality gets bad enough, my mind is going to remember something to give me ease and comfort, and it's going to take me to a drink, and I'm going to take a drink and activate a phenomenon called craving. So, it said I drink because I like the effect. This effect is so elusive that while I admit it's injurious, I cannot after time differentiate true from the false. To me, my alcoholic life, drinking seemed the only normal one. And then I believe they use some words to describe how you and I are prior to the drink. I am restless, irritable, and discontent unless I can again experience a sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks which I see other people's taking with impunity, meaning they do not lose control. After I succumb to the desire again, my mind says, let's take a drink. I take a drink. The phenomenon of craving develops. I pass through the well-known stage of esprit. I emerge remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. I repeated this over and over and over. And my book says, Mark, unless you can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of your recovery. Psychic means my mind. This is me. See, when I go through the big book, I'm looking at my experience. I'm laying alongside these words and asking myself, is this me? See, we've got a wide range of ages in here. And I was 36 years old when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. Your mind, your ego, will use everything in the world to not be an alcoholic or an addict. It'll use age. It'll use gender, education. It'll use binge drinking, sporadic drinking, you name it. It'll grab a hold of anything to not be one. And of course, the reason is simple. If ye be one, you probably shouldn't be drinking. But the point I'm trying to make, particularly, say for some of you younger people, being an alcoholic or drug addict has nothing to do with your age. It has to do with this. When you take a drink or do drugs, did you lose control? Do you break out in a phenomenon called craving? If that's you, I got bad news for you. You're done. Because that's going to happen to you from now till the day you die. From now till the day you die. And the doctor's opinion is what opened me up to this, what's wrong with me physically once I take a drink. I have an allergy. Or once I snort that line of cocaine, I have an allergy. And I break out in a phenomenon called craving, and I'm not going to finish till the craving tells me I'm done. And I can't bring mental control against this thing called craving. So that's why I am physically powerless over alcohol. And for me, over cocaine. Because when I take the line or when I take the drink, I break out in this craving, and I'm going to run it until it lets go of me. I don't let go of it, by the way. Now that's the good news. I know why I'm powerless once it's in my body. Now there's a downside to this. I knew 10 years before I came to AA that when I took a drink, I lost control. Is that true of you? How many of you knew long before you got to AA that when you took a drink, you lost control? See, you're like me. You knew it, but didn't do anything about it. Right? And later on, the book's going to tell you and I why. It's because I forget that I lose control. Because I get so diseased within myself, my mind is trying to give me some ease and comfort. It says take a drink, and I have no recall. See, my last drunk lasted a year and a half. It wasn't one day. It wasn't 3 days. It was a year and a half run. And I have the kind of mind that if I get diseased, not at ease with myself long enough, it will say, a little bit of vodka would be a nice thing. Or a little line of that cocaine would be a nice thing. And I can't remember that I have this thing. Nice thing. And I can't remember that I have this thing. This phenomenon called craving. The reason I know that, go into your experience. If 10 years before coming to AA I knew this happened, and I drink for another 10 years, this information, although it was nice to have, has never kept me from drinking, nor has it kept any of you from drinking. But it does explain to me why I'm physically powerless. Having worked a lot with chronic relapsers, and some of those were older men and women, and some of them had a long time. People who have long-term sobriety to pick up a drink or start doing drugs again, very few of them ever make it back to AA. Most die and die quickly. Why? Because this physical part of our illness seems like the older we gets worse whether we're drinking or not drinking. Meaning, if I was to pick up a drink, I strongly suspect I would drink 24/7. Recently, a man I'd done some work with, one time he had 18 years. He was a medical doctor, addictionologist, worked in the field for a while. Picked up a drink at 18 years. Took him 6 years to come back to AA. I did some work with him when I lived in Austin, Texas. Boy, did he teach me how deadly self-pity is. And he also taught me how deadly it is to analyze God. And he also taught me how deadly it is to have these old belief systems about a judgmental God. But he got about 2 years, picked up another drink, sent him to a longer-term treatment facility. He was there 4 or 5 months, got back on his feet, and went back up to Canada. Back practicing medicine again. I was supposed to go up to Canada. I went up to Canada 6 weeks ago to speak at a convention. I talked to him probably 3 months ago. He was excited about me coming up. I'd done a bunch of work. Wonderful man. I get a call 2 weeks before I'm supposed to get on the plane from a friend of mine that said Ed is dead. I don't know how. I get up to Canada. I hadn't been there 10, 15 minutes. This guy comes up, he introduced himself. He's a doctor. He said, I want to talk to you for a minute. I know that you did some work with Ed. I know that you knew him. He said, what I want to tell you is Ed picked up a drink and he drank himself to death in 4 days. 52 years old. Brilliant man. Brilliant man. One time was medical director of 2 treatment centers for chemical addiction. Deadly thing we got here. But this explains what happens to me when I take a drink. And your age, by the way, has nothing to do with this. See, I tell you one of the things that the big book will do. Every reason why you think you're not one of us, the big book will strip you. And it'll pull away and it'll say, it doesn't matter. When you take a drink, did you lose control? Is this you? But this is so expertly covered in the doctor's opinion. Good.
I always thought that this process, this recovery process that I started at 6 months sober, dying of a part of the disease I didn't know I had, I always thought this process began for me with step 1. Please don't ever let me forget. This process began with the 12th step in somebody else's heart who still cared to be there and still carried the message that could save an alcoholic like me. It begins with the 12th step in somebody else's heart. If you're new and they've told you you're the most important person in the room, finally, they've recognized your true importance. But please don't forget, you might be the lifeblood, but blood needs a heart to flow through. And those are the men and women that have a solution for you. Because if you were sitting in a room with all new people who have no solution, the county jail would have worked for a lot of us. We don't need to be with people with the same problem. We need to be in rooms with a magical combination of people who have the same problem and have a common solution. In jail, penitentiary, they paraded people by me who I said in my heart, this man has been where I've been, but they never had a solution. And they paraded people by me that had a solution, but the first thing I would say was, he doesn't know where I've been. And I think the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous happened for me when I heard a man that I knew in my heart was like me, felt like me, been where I'd been, lived with that question, what's wrong with me? Didn't know if he was an addict or an alcoholic or both. He'd been where I'd been, but I also knew at the same time he had been changed. But you know what I thought that took me 6 months to ask him? I thought he had changed himself. So when your ego has rebuilt, or you're someone who really believes you've changed yourself and smashed your ego and brought about your surrender and chose not to drink, don't be surprised if here and there, once in a while, you meet an alcoholic or a drug addict who looks at you and you scare him. Because he knows he doesn't have a choice. One of the main slogans in Los Angeles is, "We don't drink no matter what." And you know what? If I could drink no matter what, if I could just not drink no matter what, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here this weekend. I'd be home in Los Angeles, not drinking no matter what, smashing my ego, working on my defects, bringing about another surrender. I needed to meet men and women who drink no matter what. So this process did not begin for me at step one, nor was I in step one when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe if there is a step one, there must be a step zero. They talk about it in my home group in Santa Monica a lot. Step zero is that wonderfully horrible period of time from your last drink until you give yourself to the first step of recovery. That could be 6 months. I was ready to kill myself. But I had a great 6 months. Until I was given the grace to see the nature of my condition further away from my last drink than I'd ever been. That's baffling if you still think alcohol or drugs or both were your problem. Alcohol and drugs were my solution that I poured on the problem for a long time, and for a long time it worked. Step zero is that period of time where you're round and around and around. And you know what you're doing in step zero? Whether it's 4 months or 4 days or 4 years or 20 years before you give yourself to the first step, you know what you're doing in that circle, in that zero step? You're eliminating alternatives till you get down to 2, the big book says, then you're ready for the program. And what are those 2 alternatives? Die an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis. Mine was like, die an alcoholic death, live on a spiritual basis, or do the best I could and just not drink. And I made it 6 months with that. In the grace of God, but I was taking the credit. I believe there's a form of denial stronger than the denial some of us came here with. And it's a form of denial that you can be in 5 years sober, 10 years sober, 15 years sober, 20, 30. And it's not talked about that much. And I know I'm not the only one. Mark's had it, other friends. I know people in this room that have had it. And it's not the denial of the disease. It's the denial of the grace of God. And that's when you're taking the credit. Look at the great job I've done. Thank God that God doesn't care whether He gets the credit or not. He doesn't need any more credit. But sometimes I can be in that denial. And once again, see, I'm not in step zero just once. You can be in step 9.0. And all of a sudden those amends don't have nothing to do with being powerless over alcohol anymore. And you're eliminating alternatives. Die an alcoholic death, live on a spiritual basis, make amends, or pursue a life. I have to get a life. My God. God's given me a new life. Some people say I got my old life back. I don't want my old life or my old mind. My sponsor said, restored to sanity, we're going to assume you went sober, you went crazy 4 seconds after you were born. You don't need to be restored to your old mind. You need a new mind. So step zero is that wonderful place that can be wonderfully horrible until you're ready for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You're eliminating alternatives. Die an alcoholic death, live on a spiritual basis, or get the right girlfriend. Die an alcoholic death, live on a spiritual basis, or just go to meetings. Die an alcoholic death, live on a spiritual basis, or get the right job. And you run all those things into the ground because those things will not they will not treat your spirit. Another thing I wanted to mention was questions. The mechanics that was shared with me on how to use the doctor's opinion was turn every statement into a question. I was also told you should look at questions like a coin. There's 2 sides to every question. Those of you that have been around for a while, you will get a lot more benefit from taking the question. Let's say the question is like, does my experience abundantly confirm, top of page 23, does my experience abundantly confirm that once I put alcohol in my system, something happens which makes it virtually impossible for me to control the amount? If you've been around for a while and you're going through the steps again, it might be good to look at the other side of the coin. Maybe that's not true. Or maybe after this long period of sobriety, that wouldn't happen again. Questions are like coins. They have two sides. The prayer was very important. I had worked in treatment. I had a degree. I'd been a therapist, drinking, and now I'm here. And I'm sober. And I'm 6 months. And I'm dying. And it's confused. It's confusing. Because I think the problem, whatever it is I suffer from, should be better after not drinking longer than I ever didn't drink. And I was worse. And I'm wondering what's wrong with me. And I finally went out to this man's house I'd heard in my first meeting, Don. And I said, can you help me? He said, I only know one way to do it. We're going to start on the title page, and we're going to go through the first 164 pages, and we're going to stop at every statement. We're going to make it a question for you, and at every direction, we're going to stop until you finish that direction. I told him a little bit about my experience. He said, my God, you know enough about yourself, how you feel, and alcoholism to be dangerous to yourself and everybody around you. Why don't you just say a prayer for an open mind and a new experience? Now, he doesn't like it that we have sort of ritualized that some people call it the set-aside prayer. He pulled a joke on me not too long ago. We were on the phone and he said to me, you know, you stuck me with something that I've been blamed for a long time. And I wondered, what did I do now? And I said, what? He said, that's set-aside prayer. But it was very helpful, and it's been very helpful with people I've worked with, and very helpful every time I've started the work. In your own words, in your own way. I'm not really into it, but be careful when you're working with someone or you're doing it yourself that you don't turn the prayer into, dear God, please help me set aside what I think I know about whatever it is you want an open mind and a new experience with. Everyone I've seen that changes that prayer has first step reservations. And it's interesting. I ask God to set aside what I think I know, just long enough for me to have an open mind and a new experience. And there's information in the doctor's opinion and the rest of those chapters that I wasn't debating based on what I knew working or being in treatment. Set aside prayer is very important. I would also like to talk about one other thing. I do not believe that we work the steps to stay sober. I believe if you're working the steps, you're probably already sober. I haven't seen too many people work the steps drunk. And I learned this from a man who did the work in the Big Book for the first time when he was 20-something years sober. And he started this prayer. And he called me a few weeks later and he said, I have a real problem. I said, I know you do. What do you think it is? He said, for 23 years, I've experienced the grace of God. I've seen it in every area of my life. I've sat with it. I've realized it. I've been in the grace of God. Why do I need to do this work? I said, I don't know. I made it 6 months. I was ready to blow my head off. He said, I'll pray about that. He called me a few weeks later and he said, I know why I need to do this work. I'm an alcoholic and I would like to have a conscious contact with that which has been giving me this grace for all these years. And about a year and a half, 2 years later, he said to me that the difference between being in the grace of God, and I believe if you're an alcoholic or an addict or both, and you're in this room tonight and you don't have any drugs or alcohol in your system, I believe you're in the grace of God whether you take the credit for it or not. And he said, about 2 years later, he said, the difference between being in the grace of God and having a conscious contact with that which has been giving you this grace is like night and day. So I bring myself to this prayer. I say it now in my own words, in my own way. You should too. Doesn't need to be memorized or written down. You say it from your heart. There might be things on your mind different days. Let me have an open mind and a new experience with this appointment I have at 10 o'clock. With this meeting I have. With where I am in the work. With the craving. And I know from my own experience, you can have a first step experience. Gut level. Sober. So as far as the mechanics, if you're going through the doctor's opinion, turn every statement you can into a question. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect. Some of us became so good at our drinking We knew what to drink for a certain effect. Didn't you have that one thing that if you were going to fight was the right thing to drink? Didn't you have that right thing if you felt romantic really enhanced it? Didn't you have that drink that on a hot day was the right thing to drink? We drink for the effect. And when I talk to people, and when I listen to new people talk about when alcohol started working, it doesn't happen for all of us right away. For me, it did. But you listen to a real addict or a real alcoholic talk about when it started working, they're going to describe a spiritual awakening. They're not going to just describe a substance that felt good and it was fun to party. You want to know what alcohol was like for me when it started working? Huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes were cast aside, and a new set of conceptions and motives began to dominate me. A personality change sufficient to not be suffering from the spiritual malady. Sudden and spectacular upheaval. Sometimes it was an immediate and overwhelming consciousness, a vast change in feeling and outlook. Profound alteration in my reaction to life. Here's another myth. How many in this room have been victim of the belief there's only 12 promises in our book when they read the promises halfway through the 9th step? Good. There's promises at every step. And you know what? Every one of those promises, except for one set of promises that we don't hear about very much, every one of those promises came true when alcohol was working. Take the 9-step promises and put just before it. When alcohol was working, fear of economic insecurity would leave, right? Buy everyone a bar. Buy everyone a drink, right? Buy everyone a bar, right? No matter how far down the scale you had gone, you're sitting in the bar, booze is working, and no matter how far down the scale you've gone, you actually thought your experience could benefit others, right? All those promises happened except the ones when you've entered the world of the Spirit. The 10th and 11th step promises that we don't hear about much in AA because not very many people get past the 8th and 9th step. They never become willing to make amends to them all, and they never do. Imagine, our book says, imagine saying this in some meetings that we all know. The problem will be removed. Sanity will return. The big book promises a 6th sense besides the 5 that you've depended on your whole life. You'll be taken to a 4th dimension beyond body, mind, and emotion. That's all I had to be dominated by before I found the great reality deep down within. So it started for me with the doctor's opinion, and I found out the beginning of that answer. What's wrong with me? Why did I do what I did the day of my dad's funeral when my mother begged me not to drink? And I said to her with all my heart, was it that I didn't love her? Was it that I wanted to show up drunk? I didn't want to. But I found out that I have a physical reaction to alcohol. Why did I drink 28 days out of the penitentiary? I don't have any booze in my system. The insanity of alcohol returned. And the insanity of alcoholism is not what you do when you're drunk. It's the insanity of picking up that first drink. The best way I've ever heard it was in Australia. And the guy said, I never took the first drink drunk. I never took the first drink drunk. That's the insanity of alcoholism. I wish we had more time tonight to have spent some more time with the preface and the forewords. There's a lot of stuff in there about our history, how the book changed, how they added stories. But I think one of the most important, and back to one of our original questions, is the foreword to the first edition. My home group uses it as part of our format. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. You see, I don't suffer from a hopeless state of mind and body because I'm not craving booze and I'm not obsessed about it. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. My, how that's been forgotten. And it's not popular anymore, is it?
I use Bill's story, get through the doctor's opinion. I read the first 8 pages of Bill's story and I work with 3 words. When did I think, drink, or feel like Bill? That's to follow an instruction they gave me in the forewords. Did this happen to me? Am I like this? And I highlight anywhere where I think, drink, or feel like Bill, and regardless of your age, if you're a real alcoholic, you're going to find yourself all over those pages. I do not read pages 9 through 16. in Bill's story until I'm up to the 8th step. And the reason is because pages 9 through 16 will discuss Bill as he moves through the process of the steps, and I'm going through to have a new experience and I'm not there. So I'm not going to read it till I get to the 8th step. Then I'm going to go back and compare my experience to the one he describes to see if I had the same experience.
But at the same time, it can be very beneficial to use 9 to 16 with somebody doing it the first time or doing it again yourself to ask yourself, is there anything in 9 to 16 that Bill did that I'm not willing to do? When I start to work with somebody, I give them some questions. Is this work what you want to do? Are you willing to go to any length? Why do you want to do this work? And why with me? Because most of the idiots I get, that's exactly what I'm asking myself by the time they leave my house. Why me? Right? And I find out why. And those, I believe, sometimes sponsors don't know that I believe it's as much of a commitment for me as it is for the person who's asked me to take them through this work or to be a sponsor. And you know what? If you ask me to be your sponsor or to go through the steps, if you want to do this work to get a wife back or straighten out your life, I'm not your guy. If it has something to do with life and death. So as much as I agree with Mark, I think it can also be beneficial as a guide to the rest of what's coming to see and ask them to mark anything in 9 to 16 they're not willing to do that Bill did. So as Mark said, with 1 through 8, you're examining your drunkalog, not Bill's. I read Bill's story. I was never married. I wasn't in war, and I'm not a stockbroker. And this old boy in Denver told me, why don't you put aside the differences and look for the similarities? And as far as, like Mark said, drink, how he drank, how he thought, how he felt. I've seen women go through Bill's story and mark 3/4 of it. When you look at it brings you to your own drunkalog. And in 9 and 16, you can get an idea of what you're going to be asked to do in the rest of the steps.
Page 20. There's some important things in this page I work with. You may already have asked yourself, why is it we became so very ill from drinking? Doubtless you may be curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. So if you're an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. And then they spend a paragraph describing all the things that people have said to us over the years. And actually we could add to that some of the one-liners that I hear in the meetings. You know, here, I can take it or leave it alone. Why can't he? Just don't drink and go to meetings. Right? Put the plug in the jug. All of those one-liners may as well be in this part here. And the book says that these are observations on drinkers we hear all the time, but back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. These expressions or all of these statements refer to people whose reactions to alcohol and drugs are different from ours. I will never say those kinds of things, and here's why. I went to a bunch of AA meetings about 2 years before I got struck sober, and I got struck sober. And I heard some of that cute stuff. So I'm sitting there, and I hear a guy that says he doesn't drink between meetings, and I drink. And I hear a guy that says, just don't drink and go to meetings, or don't pull the bull out of the jug. And I do all that, and you know what my head starts saying? AA will not work for me, because those people can do some things I can't do, which is why we probably have no business saying that baloney in our meetings. If you got the power to do all that stuff, you're not an alcoholic. I am powerless over alcohol. I don't decide whether the plug stays in the jug or comes off of it or not. But now the book's going to talk about 2 kinds of drinkers and then a real alcoholic. And so if you're sitting here and you had any questions about alcohol, drugs, whatever, this part can help you. First of all, it's going to talk about this moderate drinker, and they define this person. They have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason. So I asked myself, did you ever have good reason to give up liquor entirely? Yes. How about cocaine? Yes. Could you do that? It says they can take it or leave it alone. Could you? And I go into my experience. And I go, no. I could not take it or leave it alone. I seem to always take it. So that means I'm not that guy. So we'll go on to the next one. We got a hard drinker. This person has a habit bad enough to impair me physically and mentally. That was true of me. This habit may cause me to die a few years before my time. This is true. If a sufficiently strong reason, they give some. Ill health, falling in love, change of environment, warning of a doctor, and you could add to that, parents, wife's gonna leave, criminal justice system, you name it. Here's what this person does. This person can stop or moderate. And so I asked myself, did you ever have sufficient reason, Mark, to stop, stay stopped, and moderate? Oh yeah, long list of them. Based on your experience, could you pull that off on your power? No. Then I'm not this guy either. And what I'm left with is the real alcoholic. The real alcoholic may start off as a moderate drinker. He may not even become a hard drinker, but at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption or drugs once he starts to drink. Is this you, Mark? Yes. Now I got my truth. I'm a real alcoholic. Based on fitting this criteria. I don't fit the criteria of being a moderate or a hard. Now I want to tell you something else that I've seen happen in our fellowship. If you're a real alcoholic and get a hard drinker as a sponsor, how do you think that's going to work? There's hard drinkers sitting in the rooms of AA who had something happen, came to AA, they liked the fellowship and stayed. You know how I can tell them? They don't need to do step work. They can just not drink and go to meetings. They absolutely can. They got power. They don't have to make all their amends. They don't have to work with the strict disciplines of 10 and 11. They don't have to sponsor people. I know. I've helped people in the rooms of AA find out their truth, that they're not alcoholic. And there isn't a single one of them that's ever had to do what this book asked me to do. And the reason is the book says it's because they got power. But this is me. I'm the real alcoholic. I'm the guy that lost control. Now I'm starting to find out a lot more about me and who I am using the big book as we're outlining here. And then if you turn over to page 23, and I want to talk briefly about pages 23 to 43. Top of page 23, looking at the body stops. From page 23 to 164, the big book will no longer talk to you and I about drinking, about having alcohol in our body. Why? Because it says, because Mark, all of this information would be academic and pointless if you never took the first drink. And I see the truth of that. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic or addict centers in my mind rather than in my body. What in God's name are they saying? Now, I told you earlier, this is based on experience. I believe 23 to 43 to be the least understood pages of the book by anyone I've ever known with relapse history. So let's cover some key points in these pages. And I want you to remember something. When we talk about pages 23 to 43, we are talking about the times in your life in which you are sober and your mind took you back to a drink. And did you choose that? Or is it possible that sober at certain times you have lost the power of choice, you have no effective mental defense, and it doesn't matter what the reason is, there's a part of you that's going to take you back. Is that possible that you're one of those kind of people? In the bottom of page 23, it talks about the tragic truth. If the man be a real alcoholic, this happy day may not arrive. He's lost control. See, I've lost control when it's in my body, and I've lost control over staying stopped. And it talks about at a certain point in my drinking, I passed into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking was of no avail. And then you have this paragraph in squiggly lines. And this is not good news, by the way, if you're sitting in this room and this is you. This is not a good news paragraph. I'm going to tell you that right up front. I think that's why they put it in squiggly lines. They wanted me to make sure it caught my attention. And here's why. It's in this paragraph. They explain very clearly to me that why sober I'll commit the most insane act I've ever done. Because the fact is, that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, we don't know, we've lost the power of choice in drink, period. They are not talking to me about having taken a drink. They're talking to me about prior to taking a drink. I have lost the power of choice in drink. And they're kind enough to elaborate on why. Because choice comes from will. They go on to say, here's why you've lost the power of choice in drink. Because your so-called willpower, which is where choice comes from, becomes practically non-existent. You're going to be unable at certain times to bring into your consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of a week or a month ago. You are without defense against the first drink. That paragraph changed my life in this program. Why do you think it did that? Because it showed me I needed something between me and my mind sober taking me back. I needed power. I saw the truth of this. I saw the number of times that I was sober and I was unable at certain times to bring into my mind the consciousness of the suffering of a week or a month ago, and I took a drink and I'm stone cold sober and I didn't want to drink and I drank.
And what do we hear? Just think it through. Think the drink through. Or remember your last drunk. I can tell from some of the faces in this room, there's probably some men and women in this room who can't remember the last several months. So what are they in big trouble? Right? I love when blackout drinkers get up and tell you detail after detail after detail. I think blackout is by the grace of God. I think that's an act of grace. Right? If remembering the pain of your last drunk is enough to keep you sober, then the memory of the pain you had the last time you gave birth to a child would be a great birth control method. I can't bring to my mind, but yet I'll suffer from the delusion in Alcoholics Anonymous. Today I have a choice, and if the thought comes, I'm either going to remember the pain of my last drunk or where it's going to take me. It's crazy. There will come a time there will be no effective mental defense.
And they go on and they talk more about that, and I just want to hit some of the main sentences, because this part is just so important. It talks about, sometimes people have this idea that consequences would keep me from taking a drink. Gentleman we just read about in the Phoenix paper, he suffered some consequences prior to what he just did. You could pick up the paper every day and read about somebody who suffered severe consequences, had a period of time with no alcohol in him, and picked up a drink. Go into your own experience. Consequences had never prevented me from picking up a drink. I don't care what they were. Divorce, job, physical health. They had no power to keep me away from a drink.
And some people make it sound like they drink a lot or they start drinking again because of an emotional state or circumstance. If you honestly look back through your experience, it probably didn't matter, the circumstance. I drink when she stays. I drink when she leaves. I drink when the team wins. I drink when the team loses. I drink when I'm feeling bad. I drink when I'm feeling good. And I love to drink when I'm not feeling much at all, because that's the place I hate. Right? And I'm going to tie that in later when we get to the question, why do you believe God's working in your life today? I believe if your first step, you can get free of circumstance or emotional state having anything to do with it. You can get free of some stuff down the road that plagues people too. Emotional state and circumstance doesn't have nothing to do with the craving or the obsession. I can be feeling good, the obsession. They give you examples. The car salesman, the other guy after many years, out come the carpet slippers and he drinks again. The guy that has no cloud on the horizon. They give you examples, especially in more about alcoholism, of different circumstances and different emotional states that have nothing to do with the obsession returning. Yes, the obsession returns because of an untreated spirit, but it'll come at any time. And the funny thing is about that summary, and I love that the book at the end of 23, when you're not going to talk about the craving anymore, ends with a summary question. Don't go past the top of 23 until your experience abundantly confirms that once you put alcohol in your system, something happens, which makes it virtually impossible for you to stop. And don't go past the bottom of 43 until your experience abundantly confirms that at a certain time, there'll be no effective mental defense against the first drink. Neither me nor any other human power is going to be able to provide that defense, and that it must come from a higher power. You think the group keeps you sober? You think your sponsor keeps you sober? Move 1,500 miles away from your sponsor and have some time when you're not at meetings. And slowly, slowly you get brought back out of that denial of the grace of God to what's already there. It's already there.
Some other things, back on 24, you hear this in meetings about thinking through the drink. It says the alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, it won't burn me this time, so here's how. Or look at the next sentence, or perhaps he doesn't think at all. How can you think through the drink if you get taken to a state where you don't think at all?
And some of you that have been around for a while probably think that it would be the lie that would take you out of here. One of our heroes told us a long time ago to look at our experience and see that the eagle will use the very best of you. At your very best. Some of you have been further away from your last drink than you've ever been, in good shape, things going well, and bam, you drank again. What about this idea? I think most of us in this room would be taken out by an idea that would be the truth. You're sitting on a plane, you watch somebody served a drink, your mind says, oh, it's really pretty. Is that a lie? It is pretty. Red wine, whiskey. Gee, I bet that would taste good. Is that a lie? Not if you love the taste of whatever it is you're looking at. A couple of those would be nice. Is that a lie? See, my sponsor told me when I was new, and it's true to this day, the truth doesn't work for me. If there's no power behind the truth, I could know the truth all day long. I knew enough about myself and alcoholism, like I said, to kill myself and people around me. There's got to be some power behind the truth. The truth would take me out. My sponsor said the truth doesn't work for you. You have the unique ability to take the truth in here, find the edge, think of how you're going to use it, and by the time it comes back out, it's no longer the truth. Dr. Silkworth said, alcoholics can't differentiate the true from the false. Back then, that meant to me, I couldn't tell the difference between what it was doing to me and what it was doing for me. Even when all you got left is oblivion and all you ever get is just out. It's not even hardly working anymore. That is still going to overwhelm what it's doing to you. You can't differentiate the true from the false. The line that I think is important, whether you're new or old or in between, is also on the first page of More About Alcoholism. And this, I would say, could sum up every problem that I've ever had in sobriety. And you know what that is? The delusion that I am like other people presently has to be smashed over and over and over. I thought when they said that in that first paragraph, I thought they meant that when I was drinking. But the way it's worded here to me now, in that second paragraph on page 30, these people saw that they had to fully concede to their innermost self that they were alcoholic. That's a gut level experience. That's not just reading on the wall, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives are unmanageable. I thought powerless over alcohol meant I don't like where it takes me. No one had ever talked to me about the physical craving or the mental obsession. These people saw they had to fully concede to their innermost selves that they were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. And then the one that sums it up, the delusion that we are like other people, or presently, maybe like other people, has to be smashed. A lot of people go out with big time behind that because they think they're like normal people now. We're not like normal people sober. We need power. We're not just someone who can walk into a church, hear a great sermon, and go home and start to practice that. We would like to. You do it for about a week or so, and then the needed power isn't there. We're people that suffer from a disease that's rooted, whether you're talking about the craving, the obsession, or the spiritual malady, we suffer from a disease that's rooted in lack of power. I don't have the power to control the amount once I start. I don't have the power to keep myself stopped once I stop. No one in this room probably had a trouble stopping. Staying stopped is the problem. And I don't have the power to heal the spiritual malady. I suffer from lack of power. no matter which part of the three-part disease you're talking about. I can't keep myself sober.
Yeah, you're talking about in terms of the time? Yes, there was a schedule change. I mean, if you have to go. We're going to go another 14 minutes. Yeah. Sorry, we forgot to announce that.
I've had a change of heart and ideas about a page that we used to take. Sometimes it was helpful, sometimes it was not. And that is the bottom of page 31 where it says, we don't like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. Step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it more than once. It will not take long for you to decide if you are honest with yourself about it, and it might even be worth a bad case of the jitters to get a full knowledge of your condition. I had to go back and I had to read Marty Mann's primer on alcoholism. She was the first woman to stay sober in AA. The first woman in AA blew her head off, killed herself. The second woman, the first woman to stay sober in AA was Marty Mann. Her story's in the older edition. Marty Mann's story was a story called Women Suffer Too, in the first section of the first pioneers of AA. She founded the National Council on Alcoholism. She wrote a book, and people in Denver used to say that in that book, she suggested a test that if you're not convinced, you try 2 drinks a day for 30 days, no more, no less. I had to go back and read that because I found this out. That might not happen to an alcoholic that's in the grace of God. So I went back and I read, and she was talking about a drinking alcoholic who's in that pattern of drinking with the craving, the obsession. She says during that time, try to stop that pattern of drinking and control it. I don't give the drinking test to people. I don't even suggest it to people that are sober, because how would you know? What if they passed and all it was a period of time of grace? They might find out they aren't. It might kill them. I think that test should be tried for somebody who's still in their drinking, experiencing the craving. My experience with the first step the first time was this. I had a huge drug history. And you know we have to talk about it, and we talked about it earlier. I've been addicted to drugs. But does that mean that I'm a drug addict? That'd be like saying every hard drinker in the world is an alcoholic. He just described a hard drinker. He can have a habit. He can be physically and mentally impaired. Alcohol might even kill him. Give him a good reason, he makes up his mind, and he walks away from alcohol. It's a hard drinker. So what my sponsor did with me is we went through those pages with drugs, and I found out I've had the craving for drugs. If you gave my mother, God rest her soul, you gave my mother cocaine. You gave any normal person you can think of cocaine, they're going to experience a physical craving. They might even, if they have a habit badly enough, experience a mental obsession. So here I was, looking through my experience. I saw the craving and the obsession for certain drugs. Then he went back to that page that Mark just went over. The most important page in the first step. The moderate, the hard, and the real alcoholic. Those aren't 3 kinds of alcoholics. Those are 3 kinds of drinkers. I'm definitely not a moderate drug user. Maybe I'm a real addict. But maybe I was a hard drug user. So I went back and I looked at my experience. Given a sufficiently strong reason, I made up my mind. I walked away from heroin. Couldn't quit drinking. Woke up one day, I said, I hate the way cocaine makes me feel. Walked away from it. Never did it again the rest of my life. Couldn't quit drinking. So technically, by the book, I'm a hard drug user who's a real alcoholic. And they use the same guidelines with alcohol. I'm definitely not a moderate drinker. I looked at maybe I'm just a hard drinker. And I looked at the sufficiently strong reasons. So what I'm saying is I believe that page that he went over with the moderate, the hard, and the real, is it applicable if you're working with a drug addict? As applicable as you're working with an alcoholic? And maybe if somebody finds both. In all these years, Mark and I have met very few people that are a real addict and a real alcoholic. But there are exceptions. There's people that are both. Our friend here tonight damn near died in Alcoholics Anonymous being told that he was alcoholic. Guy came over to my house one day and he said, I want to go through the work. I said, great. We started into the doctor's opinion. He said, I need to tell you something. That's never happened with alcohol. That craving. He said, I can take or leave alcohol. I said, why do you say you're alcoholic? And he said something really sad to me because he'd been in this program 7 years. He said to me, I say I'm alcoholic because they told me I am. He was never given the grace or the dignity to find his own truth. Why is it so important to find your own truth in the first step? Because it's a program that demands rigorous honesty. And we've seen people start the work based on a lie, get to the 9th step, crazier than when they started.
It's also a program that requires identification. We have a lot of relapsers in here. I want to go back to something on page 24, 25, and a couple other things. Speak briefly to the spirituality, but bottom of page 24, we've gone through and we've looked at this idea, is this me? Does my experience confirm I've lost the power of choice in drink or drugs? Have I sober with sufficient reason? Has my mind taken me back? And if that is so, that's me. The book says at the bottom of 24, when this sort of thinking is established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, with that experience, he or she has probably placed themselves beyond human aid. You need to ask yourself a question. Have I, and what does that mean to me? I was very clear. I made a list of all the forms of human aid I had attempted to work with to not drink. And I was very clear, no human was going to keep me away from alcohol. Why is that important? Because if you're beyond human aid, what's left? See, I was somewhere between agnostic or atheist my first time through this work. But I'm not an idiot when all I'm left with is beyond human aid. When my experience abundantly confirms that, it got me very open-minded about the God issue. I was no longer in the debating society about God. I just needed power. And then on page 25, 4 lines up, I get two options again. Here they are. The bitter end or spiritual help. Yet we're the only people that say, well, what does the bitter end look like? Well, ultimately it always looks like the bitter end. And ultimately it's death. And it may take years. I've seen it take many shapes and forms. I think my friend Ed was lucky. We drank himself to death in 4 days. I've seen horrible, horrible things happen to people. Paralyzed from the neck down, and you relapsers, get this part. Get this, that you're beyond human aid. I was telling a gentleman at the break. There are some of us in the book, in one of the chapters to the wives, talks about 4 kinds of drinkers, 4 kinds of alcoholics. And there are some of us that absolutely better make this a way of life 24/7. That our spirits need to be fed. And you better find out if you're one of them. And if you are, if that's you, then I strongly suggest you surrender and embrace this as a way of life. And how you feel about that or what you think about that, I don't think makes much difference, quite frankly.
And it's one of the first paradoxes in our program. The one that's in the worst shape, they say, has a better chance for this program. Type 1 may or may not even be alcoholic. He's begun to get in trouble, he or she. Second one's in a little more trouble. Third one's in a little more trouble. The fourth one has reached a place of hopelessness, and he has a better chance. Why? The other ones still have alternatives. It saddens me sometimes when people come to this program before they're done. The seed might be planted. They might remember something. It's a horrible struggle when you're not done. And I think most of this debate about all of that comes from a statement. God has either removed the obsession or He hasn't. Or the one that I really like, those people we get to watch? He wants to want to. He wants to want to be sober. I don't identify with these guys. Hey, I went out for 2 nights and I got myself back to a meeting. I relate to this guy that I know in Los Angeles. He did all the work. Famous comedian. Everywhere he goes, pats on the back and applause. He got to the end. He had about 10 amends left and he became adamant. I'm not making that one. I'm not making that one. I'm certainly not going back to New York. And drank. And he can't get back. And he wants to be sober really, really bad. Some people drink past desire, choice, whether it's right, wrong, necessary. You know? I'm a type 4, and I think there's more hope for me than anybody who still thinks they have other than 2 alternatives. But I'll tell you what, to die an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis, my first thought was, what do you mean living on a spiritual basis wouldn't always be wonderful? You know, sometimes stuck in grace is not always a great thing. He couldn't drink even if he would. Is not a wonderful promise sometimes when you're 15, 20 years sober and you're suffering and you believe the work won't work. One of the saddest things I've heard from people with time is, I've worked the steps. You know what they're telling you? There is no more God for me. Then they go off to graduate school and those programs that hook alcoholics. AA was kindergarten, but you come to our program and it's graduate school. And they start doing stuff instead of, rather than along with. We hear about a lot of people going out behind insanity. What about the people we lose all the time that just blow right out the top of AA? Take 3 words, power, control, and choice. If you're powerless and you've lost control, whether you start or you stop, how could you have a choice? If you lose one, you lose all 3. How am I going to say to you, hi, my name's Joe, I'm an alcoholic, I'm powerless over alcohol, and today I have a choice. I've run into people that actually say, God gave me a choice to drink again. I gotta ask them, what kind of God did you choose that would give you a choice over something you absolutely know is going to kill you? I don't have a choice to do. There's nothing I can do to keep myself sober. And I'm not doing this, carrying the message or going back through the steps to keep myself sober or manage my life. I've tried it. It didn't work. It didn't work. I go through the steps. I carry the message. I work with other people. I work the steps. I read the book. I go to meetings and I have a sponsor because those things help me seek a deeper relationship with that which is already keeping me sober. They're just fingers. We don't worship the fingers. Right? You give your sponsor the finger. You know, he's just a finger. Don't give him the finger. Right?
We're out of town for tonight. We will resume this tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The silence followed with the serenity prayer. Thank you. Serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I'd like to read something that has helped me a lot. It's called Dismount Your Donkey at the Summit. Some places in this world are very hard to climb, and people use animals. Each person can only ride one, and each animal might have a different name. The riders go up the trail in different orders, and they discuss their varying opinions about their experiences. They may even have conflicting opinions. One traveler may think the trip thrilling, another may find it terrifying, and a third may find it banal. At the summit, all the travelers stand in the same place. Each of them has the same chance to view the same vistas. The donkeys are put to rest and graze. They are not needed anymore. We all travel the same path to God. The donkeys are the various doctrines that each of us embraces. What does it matter which doctrine we embrace as long as it leads us to the summit? Your donkey might be a Zen donkey. Mine might be a plastic donkeys. All lead to the same place. Why do you poke fun at others over the name of their donkey? Aren't you riding one yourself? We should put aside both the donkey and our interim experiences once we arrive at the summit. Whether we climbed in suffering or joy is immaterial. We are there. All religions have different names for the ways of getting to the holy summit. Once we reach the summit, we no longer need names, and we can experience all things directly. We spent some time last night talking about the circle and triangle in the table of contents and forwards, some general information about AA. We talked at length about your first step experience is what will bring about a willingness to do the rest of the things that the big book is going to ask you to do, to have a revolutionary spiritual experience. I shared with you my own experience about the importance of a current experience with the first step. I've been sober since October 19th of 1982. My first step experience, is it alive for me today? Or is it just an old memory of something that used to be a long time ago? Do I still need power? We looked at some information in the doctor's opinion about this thing about, am I powerless physically? Do I have this thing that they call an allergy, a manifestation of a craving, which addresses the issue really of control? When I take a drink, do I lose power, choice, and control over how much I drink? That answer really is yes or no, based on my experience. Spent some time looking at a moderate drinker, a hard drinker, a real alcoholic. And what separates the real alcoholic from the moderate drinker or hard drinker is loss of control. It has nothing to do with how much you drank, how often you drank, how old you are, etc., etc. It has to do with loss of control. From there, we begin to look at page 23 of the big book, where we're told that our main problem centers in our mind rather than in our body. And we looked at the idea, the reason the book says that is because if your experience was like mine, years before I came to AA, I knew that when I took a drink or I did a line of cocaine, that I lost control, but I kept doing it anyway. So knowing that I have an allergy and knowing that that's why I break out in a phenomenon of craving is good information, in so much as that it explains some things about me and this relationship I have with alcohol. At the same time, though, I went into my experience and I saw that knowing that information never kept me from picking up a drink, because I forget that. I forget that that thing happens to me. And I don't have the capacity at certain times to bring to bear the memory of the suffering and humiliation of a week or a month ago. Therefore, I am without defense against the first drink. We looked at this idea. We posed a question: how many of you are choosing to stay sober? And some of you raised your hands that you were. And we ask you to ask yourself, where'd you get that belief system? And we looked at what the big book said, and the big book said, no, Mark, you've lost the power of choice and drink. And it went on to elaborate why. Choice comes from will, and at certain times my will is going to be completely unavailable to me. And it was in those pages that I was shown that I have two options: to die an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis, based on what I'd seen so far in the book, if my experience is similar to what these people described. There's one other piece that I want to read, which describes my mind and describes to me alcoholic insanity. It's on page 42 of the big book. It talked about, they had said that though I did raise a defense, this is a story of about a 12-step call made on a guy who thought he had choice around alcohol. It said that they said that though I did raise a defense, your reason for not taking a drink, this defense would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that happened and more. What I'd learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. Now, there's some of us in here that we've got a few days away from alcohol. And I believe that statement speaks to us just as much as it speaks to a brand new person. It says, I knew from that moment I had an alcoholic mind, and this is now going to give me a description of me and my mind, and why the book says, Mark, your main problem centers in your mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help me in those strange mental blank spots. I had never been able to understand people who said a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then, and it was a crushing blow. Bottom of this page says, quite as important was the discovery spiritual principles could solve all of my problems. We're going to talk about that later on in the weekend. Page 43, They sum it up again, about 10 lines up. As to two of you men whose stories I've heard, there's no doubt in my mind you're 100% hopeless apart from divine help. So go into your experience. Is this you? Has human aid, human help ever been able to keep you away from alcohol and or drugs? And has it ever brought about what the book calls a permanent effect? And they summarize these pages up in the last paragraph. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Over the years, those words at certain times have gotten a lot brighter to me. The trap that I have fallen into at times, having some days between me and a drink, is taking days off from doing the spiritual disciplines of the 10th and 11th step. I believe that that's a crapshoot today, which is why I no longer do that. And my truth is, I don't know what the day looks like when this mind will take me back to a drink. And that being the case, and knowing that this is me, I'm willing to commit to the disciplines of the 10th and 11th step and what they ask me to do one day at a time till the day I die. I don't have the luxury of missing one day. That may be the day when this mind says, let's go drink again. And I'm glad that I understand that. Experientially, I'm glad that I understand that. And it goes on to say, except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. My defense must come from a higher power. Is that my truth? Your first step experience will get you very open-minded about the concept of God. My first step experience got me open-minded about laying aside what I thought I knew about God for a new experience. My need for power. People who have said to me they're struggling with the God concept, I say to them, no, you are not. You still haven't experienced your first step in the hopelessness of it. The only people I've known who are struggling with the God idea are people who still think they have some kind of power, or they haven't gone into their experience and seen the hopelessness of their first step and their need for power. Steps 2 through 12, we move through 2 through 12 because of our need for power, not wanting to die an alcoholic death. That is the only reason. There is no other reason. There is no other reason to do 2 through 12. They're acts against the will. I'm self-will run riot. I know better than anyone. There's no way in the world I'm going to do what this book asks me to do unless I see my need for power. To stay away from a drink, the unmanageability of my life. Real quickly, I want to talk about what we like to call the unmanageability or the spiritual malady. And there is a line in our big book. It's on page 64. It says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, I straighten out mentally and physically. What is this spiritual malady? What is this unmanageability? My experience is it is describing an internal condition. It is the way my mind and my emotions experience myself, you, and my life, in my life situation. There are words used to describe that. Restless, irritable, discontent. We like to use some of the words on page 52 to describe this spiritual malady, in which it says I'm having trouble in personal relationships, cannot control my emotional nature, I am a prey to misery and depression, I am full of fear, I feel useless, I am unhappy, I cannot seem to be of help to others, and I am not satisfied with the life in which I am living. That condition, that state of consciousness, ultimately is what will always take me back to a drink. Which is why I believe our big book says, Mark, when that spiritual malady in you is overcome, you straighten out mentally, meaning the mental obsession. And if you look at the rest of the steps that we're going to look at in the course of action we're going to pursue, by the time you've done the work in steps 2 through 9, the spiritual malady has been treated, which is probably in this, why in the 10th step it says, Mark, you've now been restored to sanity. You've been placed in a position of neutrality. Because I took a course of action to eliminate the spiritual malady, which is a firing mechanism for the obsession of the mind and my need for a drink. So I have a threefold illness, not a twofold. I have an illness of the body. I take a drink and I break out in a phenomenon called craving. Sober, my mind takes me back to a drink even when I don't want to go back. That's my experience. Do I suffer from a spiritual malady, unmanageability? Yes. Do I believe that any human power can remove that? And I'll leave you with this thought. Where does the spiritual malady come from? How does that come about? A little later on in the book, we're going to be told it comes from self-will. It comes from me playing God. See, I know better than God who's supposed to be in my life and where I'm supposed to live and how you're supposed to act. And the list flows on and on from there. I create the very thing that has me miserable, that I then bring to my meetings and share with you. When you ask that great question, does anybody have a problem? What an insane thing to ask in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. See, the very thing that creates the problem that you want to talk about in the meetings is the very thing that'll take me back to a drink, and I create it. The part of me that creates it is not going to willingly commit suicide. See, my self-will can't eliminate my self-will, hence the rest of the work. But this understanding my experience with the first step is what has kept me so connected to this spiritual way of life, to working and reworking these steps, to sponsorship, to accountability, to those kinds of things. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe. I'm an alcoholic. I have a little prayer I'd like to read. God, we invite you into this room to guide and direct each of us as we seek your truth. Father, please set aside within each of us that which would block us off from the truth. Lay aside our prejudices about what we think we know about this process, this weekend, and our spiritual condition. Remove our fears, Lord, that we may hear your truth through the members of this group. Give us the strength and courage to share your truth with each other in a real spirit of love and compassion for our fellow man. Amen. I have a test for real alcoholics and real drug addicts, and it comes in the form of affirmations. You know how you read some of these New Age affirmations and it says something like, look in the mirror and realize you're a perfect child of the universe, and after you read it, you feel like a piece of shit? Right? Well, I have a theory, and it was proven true by 2 women in the program in New York, that for real alcoholics, if you do the opposite in the morning, you end up feeling better rather than something that you'll probably never quite live up to. And the name of this book is Today I Will Nourish My Inner Martyr. Affirmations for cynics. Let's see what I turn to for today. Today, so that I can later bore my friends with slides from my fantastic summer vacation, I will go to every tourist trap within driving distance. Today, if I act incompetent, other people will take care of me.
Oh, man. Oh, yeah.
Here's an important one in the morning with your wife or your loved one. Today, I will read a magazine or a newspaper while someone is communicating their emotional needs to me. Today, I will remind myself that sex really does equal love. Today, I will accept the fact that I am a materialistically driven charlatan. I feel better already. Just so we can have a little view of the mechanics of the part of the book that we've covered. I always kind of wish when Mark and I do this, we could spend a lot more time from the title page to the doctor's opinion. Because that area of the book really changed my whole view of Alcoholics Anonymous when I had been around here for 6 months. I had this 6-month period with another sponsor, and he said, are you alcoholic? I said, yep. He said, is your life unmanageable? I said, yep. He said, do you believe in God? I said, yep. He said, let's do this prayer. I had no idea what the prayer was, and he gave me a sheet how to write inventory. And I was able to put who I was mad at. I've been doing that my whole life, why I'm mad, how it affects me. And then I got to the part where you have to have some power in your life to see the truth behind every resentment. And I couldn't do it. And I started to lie, and at 6 months I hit bottom with the second half of step 1. I saw the nature of my condition further away from my last drink than I'd ever been. And when I called Don, and I'd heard Don in my first meeting, but he scared me because I thought he had changed himself. I knew he was like me. He talked about how he felt as a kid, what's wrong with me, out of place, like an alien. He talked about drugs, alcohol, penitentiary, treatment. He talked about getting to AA and still having that question that so many of us still have, what's wrong with me? And I really related that he was like me. He touched me at a gut level. But then I saw someone who wasn't that way. And I, for 6 months, thought he had changed himself, and I had pretty much given up on trying to change myself way before Alcoholics Anonymous. But at 6 months, I was given the grace to see the nature of my condition, this spiritual malady, without alcohol in my system. Here's my first step, because I don't know why, but I thought the dash in step 1 was like fill in the blank. And I thought, this is my first step. Yes, I admit that I'm powerless over alcohol, and that's why my life is unmanageable. So now that I'm not drinking, everything should just be hunky-dory. And the words I filled in there were erased with 6 months of trying to do the best I could with the grace of God. I remember in Los Angeles when I moved there, 5 years sober, one of the big slogans in South Central LA was, grace is sufficient. Well, for many, many, many alcoholics, I spoke to some last night who had long periods of time before they gave themselves to the recovery process. We call that in Los Angeles step 0, slowly eliminating your alternatives just to get down to the 2 in the book. Die an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis. That wonderfully horrible period of time where you still have more than 2 alternatives. They then gave themselves to this process, and they saw that living in the grace of God and having a conscious contact with that which has been giving it to you for all this time is like night and day. And at 6 months, I decided to give myself to this process based on hopelessness. And from that hopelessness came a willingness that I had never had before. And I think that's one of our paradoxes. You know, if you're new in the room this weekend, if you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, thank God this program doesn't make sense. Because if you're anything like me and you look at your experience, everything in my life that ever made sense didn't work. And the only thing in my life that still doesn't make sense is the only thing that's worked. You come in, they say things like, don't make any major decisions in the first year. A week later, your sponsor's asking you to turn your will and your life over to the care of God. Right? Fake it till you make it. Right? That's a great paradox. Right? You're not going to make it if you're faking it. Right? Give it away to keep it. That does not make sense from where I come from. In the Michigan State Penitentiary, you don't give it away, right? I like to say that I remained celibate through my penitentiary time, and I'm happy of that. Surrender to win. That doesn't make any sense from where I come from. To win, you got to fight. So there's all these paradoxes. From hopelessness comes hope. Because maybe in the middle of your hopelessness, you'll see, hey, I give up. There's nothing I can do. That's any length. You can watch a lot of people, those of you that work with others, come out of the first step with the ego more inflated than when they started the first step. Another warning Mark and I sometimes forget, don't start this work without some sort of a commitment to go all the way through. We've seen people start and stop in step 4 or after 5 and get worse than if they started. Because you make this third step decision from some kind of place from your heart, and it will go on without you. I was told you're either putting the inventory down in black and white or you're watching it in your life in color. Right? So some of the simple mechanics that we've covered so far is to view from the title page up to the doctor's opinion as great general information about our program. The circle and triangle, it's unfortunate that we lost that due to our irresponsibility and not wanting to fight in court with people that took that from us to make money. We gave it up. But that circle and triangle, my first day at Don's house, showed me that it's a 3-part program and I was only in 1 part, expecting the results of the other 2. Going to meetings and not drinking did not treat my alcoholism. As a matter of fact, because of you people, it brought my alcoholism to the surface. From the doctor's opinion to the top of page 23, it's pretty simple. You're only looking for the truth about one thing. And it's so nice that the book ends 23 with a review of the only thing you need to be convinced of up to that page. Does your experience abundantly, not once, not twice, abundantly confirm that when you put alcohol and or drugs in your system, something happens where you lose control over how much you're going to take? Sometimes it ends quickly. Sometimes you're passed out that night and it's done. Sometimes it just lasts. Do you get that craving, which is loss of control? With the doctor's opinion, we try to turn every statement you can into a question. He makes a statement, turn it into a question. Is that true for me? There comes a time where the we part of the program is very important, but there comes a time when in the first step you must personalize it. Is it true for me? Doesn't matter if it's true for my sponsor. That's fine and dandy. Is it true for me? Can I control the amount once I start? Bill's story, 1 through 8, will take you into the middle of your own drunkalogue. The progression of your disease. Look at how he thought. Did you think that way? You'll see a progression of thinking. Look at how he drank. You'll see a progression of drinking. And how he felt. You'll see a progression to the bottom. With 9 to 16, have the person mark anything they're resistant to doing that Bill did to recover. With 17 to 23, they're going to give you some more about the craving. All of that, you only need to be convinced to your innermost self that once you put alcohol and or drugs in your system, you lose control over the amount. 23 to 43 is going to be focusing on the mental obsession that takes place before the first drink. The insanity of alcoholism is not what we do drunk. The insanity of alcoholism gets us at our very best, further away from our last drink than we've ever been, in our right mind. An idea comes in that outweighs any other truth. This time it's going to be different. What happened last time won't happen. Those of us with time approaching the first step, maybe there's some lurking notions. Maybe every year or so, as the ego rebuilds and is deflated and it rebuilds and deflated, maybe each time through the steps you'll find new lurking notions, new reservations that are not applicable to somebody brand new. Maybe now after 20 years I've learned enough to overcome that craving, or I can keep myself sober. I'll give you an example. I'm going through the steps one time with a friend that's been around. I'd been around for 10, 12 years. We got to that part that says he thought his long period of sobriety had qualified him to drink like other people. He said, you don't have that reservation, but I bet you have a reservation that your long period of sobriety has qualified you to not drink like normal people. And then now, if you just do this the right way and the right kind of meditation and this and this and this, you can keep yourself sober. It's almost like our little list. You know how we make fun of other people in AA that have their little list of stuff? Just don't drink no matter what. Call your sponsor. Today you have a choice. We make fun of their little list. At the same time, you're creating your own little list of what you think you're doing to keep yourself sober. I do not do these things to stay sober. I do these things because I am sober by the grace of God. And I want a conscious contact with that, which has been giving me this grace. So from 23 to 43, we continue to turn statements into questions. The greatest tool, if you had to ask me, what's the one tool with the big book if you only had like 10 seconds passing somebody in the airport to tell them? Hand them the book and say, just turn every statement into a question. And if you get to a direction that says, do this, don't go any further until you've done it. That's basically what they did with me the first time. And now here we are. At the top of 23, they gave you a summary of the craving. At the bottom of 43, they gave you a summary of the obsession. And we've gone from the doctor's opinion to the bottom of page 43. We've watched this phenomena, Mark and I, and a lot of other people who work with others. We've watched this phenomena in ourselves and others, where you get halfway through or 3/4 of the way through your 9th step and you stop. And I heard a lady from my home group in Los Angeles who I saw in Dallas not too long ago. She said it better than anybody I've ever heard. She said, you know, there's people that can take you forward through the steps, but there's also people that can take you backwards through the steps. Because at any given moment, you're either headed in one direction or the other. Like, what does it mean to go backwards through the steps? You're stuck in a men's and somebody says, Well, maybe you weren't really clear on 8. You didn't really become willing. Or 7, 6, 5, 4, because you don't really believe you're powerless over alcohol anymore. Your actions don't demonstrate that consciousness. And it's not that we lose the knowledge of the first step. I've had times your actions don't demonstrate that consciousness. And it's not that we lose the knowledge of the first step. I've had times where I could go give a lecture on the body, mind, and spirit, the 3-part problem in the first step, but the consciousness of the first step is not there. You know those times when you don't want to make amends and they're just coming into your life and you're making them and you don't want to? You know those times when you don't want to write inventory and it's just coming out of you and you're writing and you don't want to write? That's when the consciousness of the preceding steps is moving you through the one you're in. But that consciousness can be lost. I believe if we really look at step 1, we will see a deeper experience with step 1 in step 2. It's not like step 1 ends when you move into step 2. I think the truth about step 1 and the consciousness that it produces and the power behind that consciousness should get deeper in each step. For example, you've looked at 1, 2, and 3. You're in inventory. You're seeing your first step in black and white. In amends, you're sitting across from somebody in their living room. You're seeing your first step in color right in front of you. I believe if it is like an onion, you can go deeper into the first step as you move through 1 through 9. So this lady says, whether going forward through the steps or whether going backwards through the steps, what happens to people is they get stuck on the dash. The dash turns upside down into a wall, and all of a sudden amends are about the unmanageability of your life. Things have straightened out. Why go on? Because it's not about what's on the other side of that dash, which is, do I still believe I'm powerless over alcohol? So here's a prayer. Anybody stuck in amends, I got a great prayer for you. If you don't want to hear it, cover your ears because it will mess up your consciousness. And here's the prayer. Dear God, please show me if these unfinished amends have anything to do with whether I drink again or not. Amen. Because I'll tell you what, 99.9% of the people I've met that have gone out, Mark was talking about relapse last night, go out behind unfinished amends.
You could use that same prayer around resentments. Dear God, show me if this resentment has anything to do with whether I'll drink again or not.
You could do that with your daily practice of 10 and 11.
I want to talk about steps 2 and 3. If you want to open your big book up to chapter 4, We Agnostics. Regardless of length of sobriety, we all have some agnosticism within us. A test of that is simple. Take the last week and ask yourself, in what areas of your life are you experiencing fear? If you have some areas of your life that you've experienced fear, my experience is because that's an area of your life in which you're still relying on self. And the reason you're still relying on self is because you don't trust God with that area of your life. Length of time away from a drink has not in and of itself removed at times from me various levels of agnosticism. My first step experience in seeing what that means brings me to chapter 4, We Agnostics, in the second step, page 44. The book is interesting. They will talk to you and I, ask us to look at our experience to diagnose what's wrong with this, because after all, no one can tell us anything. So we have to come up with our own experience. And then they'll repeat, and in one sentence they repeat what they spent 53 pages on. If, when I honestly want to, I found that I could not quit entirely. So I say, is that you? Did you honestly want to quit entirely? Yes. Could you pull that off? No, I could not. Or if when drinking, I had little control over the amount I take, is that me? Yes. Then I'm probably an alcoholic. Now I have my truth. This is me. One sentence sums up the first 53 pages. And if this is the case, if this is my experience, I may be suffering from an illness which only, circle that word, O-N-L-Y, a spiritual experience will conquer. Now, I've worked with people that said, well, Mark, what does only mean? See, the first step will take you down a funnel, and at the end of the funnel, there's one option, a spiritual experience. Do you believe that? My first step took away my right to debate with you about God and God's power in my life. My first step is what got me open-minded. My first step is what keeps me open-minded today. My willingness to lay aside prejudice. It's all connected to my first step and my need for power. There's a bunch of you here, I know, from halfway houses, treatment centers. I don't know about the rest of you, but there comes a point in time in your life where I hope you get sick with winding up in places like that, and you're in places like that because you're trying to live your life on your power. How's it working? I hope you get sick of that at some point in time. I hope you wake up to your need for power and give up your right to no longer be willing to embrace this God idea and the power of God in your life. And I've had to do that in every single area of my life, from my finances to my physical health to my relationships. All my life situation stuff ties me into this lack of power is my dilemma. Page 45 talks about my resources as marshaled by my will were not sufficient to fail utterly. Lack of power is my dilemma. Is it? I had to find a power by which I could live, and it has to be a power greater than myself. Obvious. Is this obvious? See, every area of my life over the years in which I've been sober, in which pain and suffering took me to a place where I wanted it to change, every single time what I saw in my first step is lack of power was my problem, my dilemma. Not knowledge. Not knowledge. In every single area of my life, ultimately, that brought pain and suffering, lack of power was my dilemma. I'm like a lot of you. I have far more knowledge than I need. What I lacked was the power to turn that knowledge into a reality in my life. Give you a simple example. And it is tied into drinking, by the way. It's smoking. My consciousness about a year and a half ago said, we no longer wish to participate in this. That was not exciting news at that time. So I began a journey. Now, I'm a real alcoholic, and everything I do, I'll take the easier, softer way. So I went to a treatment center, the best in the country that works with that, and I spent a week there. I got a ton of information. More information than I wished I'd ever gotten. They messed that up for me forever. And what I'll report to you is over the last 14 months, I've had about 5 months in which I was smoke-free. It was incredible. I'm smoking again. Is lack of knowledge my problem? No. Lack of power is my problem. See, what person in their sane mind would do this thing? See, I'm insane in that area of my life. And trust me, I have tried it all. So I'm reworking the steps right now, and that's an area. Now, is there a connection between this life situation and a drink? Yes. Why? Well, you can play that out in your mind how that could look, where that could take you, what could happen. Some forms of illnesses that could manifest in your mind one day says, oh, hell, you're going to die anyhow. A little drinky poo wouldn't hurt. See, any life situation I have ultimately is about me taking a drink. So this is just one area of many in which I've come face to face with. Lack of power is my dilemma, not knowledge. Now here's another part in this. I have a say in this thing about do I want to recreate my life. And no one can do that, and no one can force me, and no one can make me. So those are things that have all come to me over the years, every area of my life, from my finances to this. Is lack of power my dilemma? Yes. The book says, well, that's exactly this book about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. I forget this all the time. I think I have to do something to solve my problem. That isn't how it works. I pursue a course of action as outlined in the steps, and a power shows up and solves my problem. Because see, the part of me that creates the problem is not what I'm going to go to eliminate the problem. So I take a course of action to experience a power which solves the problem. That makes my part in this somewhat simplistic. See, I'm not going to be the one who solves the problem. I'm the one who creates it. I pursue a course of action. This power shows up, and the power solves my problem. I want to touch on some other highlights on, if you turn to page 47. When I go back to the second step for me, there's two parts to this and a bunch of great promises. The first part to this is in the middle of page 47. where we're going to ask ourselves a short question. Do I now believe or am willing to believe there's a power greater than myself? I work with this every single time when I go back through the steps. It's a question, a consideration that I have to sit with. Do I now believe or am willing to believe there's a power greater than myself? In any area of my life, around my alcoholism, around any area of my life in which I need power. Is there a power greater than myself that I can have an experience with? Is lack of power in some area of my life? Is it a dilemma? If you'll turn over to page 50, the bottom paragraph, one of my favorite paragraphs in the whole book, talks about here's thousands of men and women worldly indeed. These men and women flatly declare, since they come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power and to do certain simple things, there's been a revolutionary change in the way of living and thinking. Look at the implications of that sentence. That's an amazing promise. If I'm willing to do some things, there will be a revolutionary change in the way I live and think. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of my human resources, I can find a new NEW. For those of you who've been around for a while, every time through the steps, NEW, new. New levels of power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction will flow into me. This will happen to me soon after I wholeheartedly admit a few simple requirements. Joe talked about that last night. There's some requirements as we go through this process. The requirements that the steps are going to ask me to do are like kissing a baby's butt compared to what whiskey asked me to do. You lose that first step connection, the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth can seem overwhelming. Stay connected and they will not seem overwhelming. Think of what alcohol and or drugs ask of you. Think of what it has taken from you. Stay hooked to that as you move through these steps. I mean, think about this. Okay, do I now believe there's a power greater than myself? I'm willing to choose that power is everything. Well, let's see, if I don't, I drink again and all that. I think I will. Third step, you're going to make a decision, turn your will and life over to the power. Well, let's see, I can do that or drink. You see, I can write these three inventories, drink. I can read a fifth step, drink. Identify my defects, take them to God in the seventh, drink. Make a list of all the people, all the money. Go make amends to all these people or drink. Gee, what's harder? You follow me? See? That's why the steps are circular. When Joe talks about every successive step should take you further into the first step. You need that connection in order to do it. It's no different when you get to the disciplines of 10 and 11. Do the disciplines of 10 and 11, die an alcoholic death. Let me think. See, and then 12-step work, which those of you who do it know, on the one hand, it's a glorious, incredible thing, and on the other, it is just pathetic. Whining and
Especially when you still think you can help another alcoholic.
Yeah. So it goes on to say, once confused and baffled, sober by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why we make heavy going of life. Life is not heavy going. We make heavy going of life based on our perception, our self-will, and our lack of power. Our unwillingness to accept what is. We make heavy going of life. Then the book does something very interesting. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living is so unsatisfactory. Living was never going to get satisfactory to me till I had a revolutionary change in the way I think, the way I begin to perceive life. And then they describe what has to happen. The consciousness of the presence of God. Joe talked about that. I've done the work also with some people who've been sober a long time. They had the same experience he described. It's profound. There's a huge difference between living in the grace of God and conscious contact with that which provides the grace. And I mean a huge difference. It's like one's going from one side of the planet to the other. If you'll turn over to page 53, middle paragraph, second part of the second step. When I became an alcoholic, based on my experience, crushed by a self-imposed crisis. Self-imposed, by the way. I could not postpone or evade. I have to fearlessly face the proposition, God is everything or God is nothing. God either is or God is. What is my choice to be? And it is a choice. And by the way, it's the last choice you'll have to make as you move through the steps. You're going to have to make a decision and take some action. This is the last choice that you have to make. God is everything or God is nothing. What are you going to stand on? First step, die an alcoholic death, unmanageable life sober, or make God everything. Gee, what should I do? See? If you lose that first step, and this second step can seem overwhelming to you. I tell people take a chill pill on the God issue. We agnostics says quit trying to define or comprehend God. Because ultimately, if you're like me, you're going to experience God with an organ that is different than your mind. To experience God, you must be out of your mind. Joe made a statement yesterday, which I have found to be very true. My mind and my belief systems about God can be one of my biggest barriers to experiencing conscious contact with God.
Any idea about God isn't God. Another question for those that have been around for a while. Are you more interested in consciousness or conception?
Page 55. I think I'll let Joe talk for a little bit about the second. We want to get into the third step. If this thing is about power, and I need power based on my first step experience, then where and how to find that power becomes very important. So on page 55, the book says, I'm fooling myself, for deep down inside every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God. This idea may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other, this idea of God is there. For faith in this power greater than ourselves and demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. I finally saw faith in some kind of God was a part of my makeup. That means you don't have to do anything to bring it about. Just as much as the feeling I have for a friend. Now the next sentence tells you how you're going to experience this power. You have to search fearlessly. But it says the power is there. The power is as much a fact as we were. We're going to find the great reality deep down within ourselves. That's where you're going to find God. How we're going to experience God's power is to take the rest of the steps. Where we're going to experience God's power is deep down within us. And in the final analysis, it's only there that God can be found. And that has been my experience. Steps 4 through 9 are about facing and being rid of that which has you blocked from experiencing that which is closer to you than breathing. Now that's a paradox. I mean, people say to me, well, Mark, I gotta find God. Excuse me? What do you mean you have to find God? Where isn't God? See, if there's nothing but God, there can be no God. All is God. All that these steps ever did for me was make me awake, aware, mindful, conscious of that which is always present to me. If I'm not feeling separate from that, identified with my mind, the main problem centers in the mind. I don't go looking for God. I didn't come here seeking God. I was given a precise, specific, clear-cut set of instructions. I took those and I came to experience this power. And I didn't have to go anywhere. Joe's got a funny story about that. He'll have to tell you because he went down to India. I made a quote.
Up to India.
Up to India, yeah. But I'll let him talk about steps 2 and 3.
I'm laying there in bed one night and it's cold in India this night and there's no power this night. And I'm in bed and I'm freezing to death and I have my little Walkman that runs on batteries. And I pull out a tape of Mark's from about 4 years before I even thought of going to India. And I'm laying there and I'm freezing and it's not easy this night. We've all had those dark nights wherever you might live with the heat on. And, in the middle of this tape, Mark goes, you don't have to go to India and study with the Dalai Lama to, And then I remember my grand sponsor, Gary Brown, called me one time before I went, but I knew I was going. And he said, you got to be really careful with him. And he said, you know, you got to be really careful with intuition. You can be off by 1 or 2 letters. How do you know your intuition is not saying, go to Indiana, right? Like in that movie, you ever saw that movie Always, where there's like this prophet, and the prophet keeps telling him, don't go. But all he hears is, go, go, right? I believe this big book contains the long form of the 12 traditions, the short form of the 12 traditions, the long form of the 12 steps, and the short form of the 12 steps. We've already seen in the first step there is a lot more than just admitting that you're powerless over alcohol and that your life is unmanageable. That's the short form. I love when somebody takes that spiritual principle and makes it into one word. Where do they get these one words? First step, hope. Second step, whatever, and they make up their own. I know one that's left out, I think, is in every single step. The spiritual principle of admission. To let in. To let truth in. To let it be. To let the truth be the truth. So if there's more to step 1 in the long form, we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic, bodily, mentally, spiritually. This is the first step in recovery. Another 2 important lines that I think sum up the experience that you should be feeling by the end of step 1, I believe are at the bottom of 42. Second paragraph. Here's the bottom line to the first step. Last line of the second paragraph. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. And the last line on that page, quite as important, was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. And then, of course, the summary on the bottom of 43. The scary thing about at a certain time, you have to ask yourself, do you know what that certain time would look like, feel like, or be like? And if you're truthful with yourself and you're anything like me, that certain time came when you were feeling good, feeling bad, those horrible times when you're just not feeling much at all, things going good, things going bad. So pray that your first step is not grounded in circumstance or emotional state. You got to ask yourself, maybe you're just an emotional drinker. But now you're ways down the road. Your emotions have straightened out. Maybe now you could get away with a few drinks. If you were just an emotional drinker who drank when they only felt bad. If it's a severe emotional problem, work on your emotions, getting them straightened out, find a way to cope with them and deal with them and work on them. And then maybe now you're like a normal person. Or maybe you're a circumstantial drinker. Things go bad, you drink. Or maybe you're a real alcoholic and emotional state doesn't matter as far as the craving and the obsession, and circumstance doesn't matter either. I think sometimes I love when I'm sitting in a meeting and I hear medical doctors, psychiatrists, and religious people condemned in our program, failing to remember this. The first step came from a doctor and a psychiatrist. We got the craving from a non-alcoholic doctor, Silkworth. We got the mental obsession from the father of modern-day psychology, Carl Jung, the mental obsession. The spiritual malady we learned a lot from a non-alcoholic doctor, Harry Tiebout. And 2 through 11 basically came from a fundamental religious organization called the Oxford Group. So be careful when you put down. It's interesting that our entire program comes from non-alcoholics, but it happens between one alcoholic sitting with another, and you really need that connection. Addicts working with alcoholics, and alcoholics working with addicts. You know, if you have a choice, find somebody with the same first step. I mentioned going deeper into the first step as you move into step 9. I also believe your second step gets deeper. Your third step will get deeper. Or you'll get further away from those 3 considerations. The first half of step 2, this is what we do with someone. You would think, having seen what you've seen in step 1, that it's now time to go home and see how much faith you have. I found something really interesting with our big book. It says, and this can be with somebody with time too. You've come through the first step. You're looking at step 2. The first proposition is, do you now believe, or are you even willing to believe that there is a power greater than yourself? A lot of newcomers think they take the second step, they're supposed to wake up the next day with absolute faith. It doesn't say, came to believe, do you now believe, or are you even willing to believe in a power greater than yourself, just that there is. Right? You go home and you say to yourself, well, I believe this much, and now I should increase my faith and go home and see how much faith I really have. I found the big book says, well, isn't about this much of it really faith in other things, people's sentiment, money, and yourself, your own mind, and it gets smaller. Isn't about this much of it about money, Santa Claus God, worship of things, sunset? Even the sunset, the sea, or a flower can distract you from looking within. Even when your motives are good, it can be a block to God. So I think the first half of step 2 is to see that you have about this much faith. And what we do is we have people go through the entire chapter with this proposition in mind. Do you now believe, one short question, do you now believe, or are you even willing to believe that there is a power greater than yourself? Go through the whole chapter, mark any word, any statement that helps you face where you don't believe. You face your agnosticism in step 2. A lot of people think step 2 is about insanity. The insanity is in step 1. Now you're asking, do I believe I can be restored to a place? In my case, I don't want to be restored. I want a new mind that's sane. I don't want to be restored to the mind I was born with. That got me in trouble for the next 50 years, right? I want a new mind. Am I willing to believe God can do that? So I need to see where I have doubt. And mark those words or statements that stand out to you. Honest doubt. Prejudice. Worship of things, people, sentiment, money, yourself. Believe in your mind. If it's not in your mind, it isn't. There's nothing beyond what you think. Because they're going to take you to a place where you're going to start to rely on something other than logic and reason. It's a promise in our program. I'd like to also talk about, I met a man in Denver when we got sober who was in the Red Brigade of the Oxford movement and then came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I think when Alcoholics Anonymous was 2 or 3 years old. He told me that this book was written by drunks for drunks and that here and there, once in a while, they're going to put a word if you're looking for a way out. They call them traps. Probably, maybe, rarely. And I think in that first paragraph in We Agnostic, they give you a couple words that would help you if you're looking for a way out of this deal. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount that you take, you're probably alcoholic. Now, probably is a good enough word if you're looking for a way out, but I believe another word is or. Because I've had people that are not clear on the craving, or let's say they're not clear on the obsession, but they're clear on one or the other, and they get to that line and they say, see, the big book says you don't have to have both. Because, see, the first line is describing the obsession. I can't stay stopped. The second line is describing the craving. You gotta have both to be powerless. Here's the deal. Let's say every time you drink, you get the craving. Overwhelming craving to have to drink more every time you drink. But you don't get the mental obsession. You know what the message is for you? Just don't drink, no matter what. And you'll never get that craving again. Make up your mind and don't ever drink. Just like if you're allergic to strawberries, quit eating strawberries. And if you don't have that, you'll be able to do that. Or let's say the other way around. You don't get the craving, but you get the mental obsession. Hey, next time you get the obsession, just drink the way you want to drink. You gotta have both to be powerless. I'm powerless when it's not in my body. I'm powerless when it's in my body. Both of those make up the first half of step 1. My life is not unmanageable because of the mental obsession. I'm powerless over alcohol because of a physical craving and a mental obsession. So we get to this first question. Do I now believe? If you're new, it's great. And I bet those that have been around for a while would never think, gee, maybe after 20 years, all I have to do is be willing to believe that this power can take me past where I am. See, because if you've been around for a while, this first question is not going to be relevant. 15, 20 years sober, do you now believe, or are you even willing to believe that there is a power greater than yourself? Of course you do. So some people in Denver told me there's something you can add to that question that will make it as relevant no matter how many times you've done the work. And the question is this: do you now believe, or are you even willing to believe, that this power that you say you've had faith and experience with can take you past here, all that you've seen in step 1, to levels of freedom and peace you can't even imagine? But you got to clearly see the first step. If you've been around, start by looking at the current manifestations of page 52. And whether you're new or old or in between, here's a proposition for you. Is it possible when you're sitting in a meeting talking about the unmanageability of your life, you're really talking about a drink, and there is no disconnection? The dash is not real. The dash is an illusion. And the unmanageability of your life is a drink of alcohol. And that there's no separation between whining about the relationship because your ego has a drink underneath that problem. Or how you're feeling, there's a drink underneath that problem. Here's the proposition. Is there any separation now, I don't care how long you're sober, between the current unmanageability and a drink of alcohol, and see what separates you from that unmanageability that's currently going on and why you're not drunk? And you'll see it's nothing more or less than the grace of God. Now, how do you get from being willing to believe that there is a power greater than yourself to choosing this power to be everything or nothing? You go through the chapter again, and you'll find words and statements, mark them in another color, that take you from your simple willingness to believe to choosing everything or nothing. You'll find them. There's statements like, as soon as a man can say he's willing, he's well on the way. Upon this simple, all kinds of statements like that take you from bridge to shore, that last mile. And I'll throw this out just for some discussion maybe later. I believe if you want to live, if you've answered that fundamental question at the beginning, do you want to live? If you think there's a choice at step 2, it's based in a first step reservation. Because if you want to live, I believe when you get to what you think is a choice, there is none. And if you think there's a choice at step 2, it's based in a first step reservation. This work was as relevant to me this time, 21 years sober, as it was the first time. I'm more awake. I started by looking at the unmanageability. I saw there is no separation between that and a drink, and the only thing that keeps that from happening is grace. I was asked to look at fear. Is there any fear? Because you know a place that a lot of us have missed? We had to fearlessly face the proposition. I think fearlessly means without fear. A friend of mine told me his sponsor told him fearlessly means with fear, but you do it anyway. No. Fearlessly means fearlessly. And here's what I'll throw out for you. If, when you get to this proposition, God is everything or nothing, that the book says we have to face fearlessly, if there's any fear about drinking again, it's a first step reservation that you can do something about not drinking again. Because I believe fear is always rooted in an idea of self-reliance. Doesn't the book say that? Fear is because self-reliance fails. If you're in fear, there's a lurking notion that you can do something. We used to say things like, you can't go to the second step in a good mood. Why not? Maybe the first time. And if you're being motivated by the fear of drinking again, great, if it gets you through amends. But there will come a time, for those of you that have been around for a while, that to fearlessly face this means to fearlessly face this. Without fear. Look through the fear. See the lurking notion, rooted in self-reliance. The fear goes away, and I was given the grace to fearlessly face this proposition with no fear of drinking again. Because I don't think there's anything I can do about drinking again.
The experience of the experience is more important than any explanation. I take the course of action, the experience happens to me and through me. And I don't label it, and I don't prejudge it, and I don't presuppose to know what it's going to look like. Page 60, I want to talk about the third step. Come up to the ABCs. Is this my truth? I'm an alcoholic and cannot manage my own life. And I have an experience with that. Probably no human power could relieve my alcoholism. Is that my truth? We all over the years have had many humans influence us in recovery from alcoholism. They are like the big book or the steps. They're pointing us to this power. That's all that they can do. See, God could and would if He were sought. Being convinced of that, I'm in step 3, and I'm going to make a decision. Turn my will and life over to God as I understood God. I don't understand God. Because the organ I would have to use to talk to you about that is my mind. God is so far beyond that. So the God of my understanding today is I don't understand God. I quit trying. It turned my hair white. I'm only 29. Some of us have attempted to intellectually come to know God. You will go insane. 10 years, they locked me up in a nut house. I'm going to figure out the God thing. Right? Versus an experience with it. Now, there's a requirement before I make my third step decision. I love going back and looking at this third step every time through the work. I have always, every single time, been awakened to more things about myself, my self-will, how I come in life, and God by going back in and looking at this again. But this requirement is, am I convinced my life run on self-will can hardly be a success? I look at that from a position of being free from alcohol 21 years. Am I convinced with this length of time that my life run on self-will can hardly be a success? And now the book's going to take about a page and a half to describe what this looks like. So I always go through this process with my current experience with my life. And it talks about when I run my life on my will, I'm always in collision with something, somebody, even though my motives are good. I love to live by self-propulsion. I'm like an actor. I want to run the whole show. I want to arrange lights, ballet, all of you, AA, my home group, all my employees, my girlfriend, in my own way. And if you all would just stay put, if you all would just do what I wished, then the show would be great. And I read this and I say to myself, this stuff is going on again. How did this happen? How did this happen? See?
The crazy thing in that part of the third step is, I think if you do what I want, not only will I be happy, but you'll be happier too. I'm like an actor who wants to be a director who ends up being a producer. That works a lot better in Los Angeles, but I think you got to feel for what we produce.
And it says, well, what usually happens? And all what this is attempting to do is introduce me to something which is contained in my decision in the bottom of 62. It's trying to show me how I like to play God. The bulk of the amends that I have made since I got sober came from my attempts to play God. It's critical for me that I see that and experience that. So what happens? The show didn't come off very well. I begin to think you don't treat me life doesn't, so I'm going to exert myself more. I become on the next occasion then demanding your graces. Talks about ultimately what happens is I become angry, indignant, and self-pity. What's my basic trouble? I'm a self-seeker even when trying to be kind. I'm a victim of the delusion. I'll be satisfied and happy if I can manage well. And I take all of my time attempting to manage well, which is also then where all my fear comes from. Talks about it's evident to all the rest of the people in my life, these are the things I want. It gets in and describes the fact that I am self-centered. Page 62. This is the first time the book is going to finally tell me what's really wrong with me. Selfishness and self-centeredness is at the root of all my troubles. And when you are selfish and self-centered, you're going to go through life being driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. I'll give you a consideration. Look up the word driven and look up the word choice and ask yourself this question, particularly if you've been sober for a while. Do you have parts of your life in which you are being driven versus making choices? Go back in just the last year and quote, look at what one of the great tricks that my mind did with me is it got me to believe that sober I was making choices till I looked at some of them. They were insane. They were absolutely insane choices. Meet her on Friday and marry her on Tuesday. Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on and on. And through repetitive times through the steps, I came to understand I wasn't making choices, that I was being driven. And there was no choice. Because when I'm into self-will, there's not choice. There's only the manifestation of how I think my self-will is going to be manifested. Choice comes from a state of neutrality. See? With an unselfish motive. And it talks about then, and it's a setup for inventory. When you go through life being driven, it's like the reverse of a 4-column inventory. Imagine the 4th column first. Fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity. What does it do? It causes you to take a course of action. You step on the toes of your fellows, column 1. They retaliate, column 2. You're hurt, column 3, but it all started with 4. It's a circular deal. What you put out will come back to you. When we get to the resentment inventory, you're going to write a 4-column. You're going to start with column 1, 2, 3 and come to 4. But 4 sets the ball rolling because you're being driven. And it says invariably, you made decisions based on self, which place you in a position to be hurt. So our troubles are of our own making. Now the book starting at page 62 also does something very different. It begins to take a light and shine it on ourselves. And it's no longer about them. Some friends of mine in Nashville had these laminated things put up. It's not about them. And they're going all over meetings. And if someone starts whining about them, they give them one of the laminated cards. It's not about them. It's not about them. It's about you. Your perception, how you experience it. My troubles arise out of myself, and I'm an extreme example of self-overrun riot, though I do not think so. Next sentence to me is one of the most important lines in the big book. Seldom talk. Above everything, I must be rid of the selfishness or it will kill me. You must see the connection between your selfishness and dying an alcoholic death. See, if I don't get rid of my selfishness, what's going to happen is the show's not going to turn out the way I want. I'm going to create a spiritual malady within myself. I'm going to become diseased, and my mind at a certain time knows what will treat that, which is a drink or a line of cocaine. And I'm going to put that in my body. And a guy like me is facing alcoholic death. That's the connection. The only way I get rid of the selfishness is do the work in the rest of the steps. So the bottom of 62 is my 3rd step decision. This is the how and the why, but I got to quit playing God. Hopefully I'm going to wake some of you up this weekend to how you still play God in people's lives and the harm that that creates. Instead of giving people the dignity to just be themselves. I don't ever attempt to force this work on anybody or a spiritual way of life anymore. You do this work enough times and you start to see what you'll do out of your virtue. I want to help them. I only work with people who give me spiritual consent. Why? Because I quit playing God in other people's lives. That's why. I'm not here to rescue alcoholics and fix people. You want to stay caught up in pain and suffering and misery? Have a great day. I'm here to dance and have joy and all those other incredible things. And I'm going to leave you the dignity to stay in your suffering if you want. I mean, the theme of this weekend is how free do you want to be? Unbelievable freedom available to you. And then we get to make this incredible 3rd step decision then. Based on the fact that I finally know why. I'm going to quit playing God. Why? Because me playing God doesn't work. And I'm clear finally why I'm going to make this decision. Because I'm going to die an alcoholic death if I don't. And this decision means I'm going to say a prayer, which is an affirmation of the decision. And then I'm going to be willing to do the rest of the steps.
We talked about myths last night. How many people at some time or right now believe the 3rd step is turning your will and your life over to the care of God? A lot of people believe that. Go home, take the 3rd step, come back the next day, your entire will and life's turned over to the care of God. It's not. It's just a decision. How do you turn your will and your life over to the care of God? By taking actions you can't take contrary to your will and against the way you've lived your life in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let's say that the 1st step is like an onion. And you think, wow, haven't I done well in admitting I can't control booze once I start to drink? They say, no. What about when you're not drinking? Okay, I can't keep myself stopped once I've stopped. How about that? No. What about the ability to manage your life? Your emotional nature, misery, depression, making a living that's you feel passionate about, being of real help to other people, overcoming uselessness and fear. Then you come to that and you go, wow, haven't I seen enough? And then they go, can you really advance your spiritual growth on your own power? Then they take you into the deep forms of self-will. Then you're in an inventory. Then they say you can't wish away anger any more than alcohol. You can't make fear go away. You don't have what it takes to bring any power to a relationship. The sex inventory is not about sex. It's about relationship with ourselves, God, and other people. Then you say, okay, I've done well in admitting all this stuff, but now I'm going to work on my defects now that I've admitted them. Then they say, wow, if you can work 6 and 7, have at it. Right? If I could work 6 and 7, I certainly wouldn't be working 8 and 9. Then you say, well, I've finally surrendered. I can't even fix my own defects. Now I'm going to go out and repair the damage. Do you have the power to do that? Well, now as I do that, I'm going to practice 10 and 11, and I'm going to maintain. One of the biggest first step reservations are people in 10 and 11 thinking they're the ones that bring about the daily reprieve by maintaining their spiritual condition. That's a gift too. They don't call presence presence because it's not a gift. They call presence presence because it's a present. It's a gift. How about this one? Work the steps to the best of your ability. And a friend says, didn't you tell me a couple weeks ago the best of your ability is to be glued to a bar stool, unable to get up, messing up everybody in your life? I'm going to work the steps to the best of my ability. Don't have the power to do that. It just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Go back to everyone you ever hurt. You got the power to do that? A guy said to Mark one time in Texas, because in Texas they're tough. And they love, God will do for me what I can't do for myself, but I pretty well better do what I can do for myself, right? And this guy says to Mark, the idea that you can finish every amends you're aware of is like thinking you could take a feather pillow to the top of the Empire State Building, throw them feathers out and go find every one of them. And right off the top of his head with no thought, Mark said, what if you had a personal relationship with the creator of each of those feathers? Could he take you to him? Because we know people after people after people after people who've been given the power and the grace and the guidance and the direction to make every amends they're consciously aware of. I can't do that. I can't keep myself sober.